The smell of melting silk is something you never forget. It smells like burning hair and ozone. It was 11 at night on a Friday in an Illinois boutique hotel just 14 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. I stood frozen in the center of the bridal suite, watching my $18,000 custom gown blister and curl into ash inside the gas fireplace. The fabric hissed as the flames ate through the delicate lace bodice. It took a seamstress 8 months to bead by hand. Beside the hearth stood my fiancé's mother, Brenda Sterling. She held a silver candle lighter in her right hand and an empty crystal wineglass in her left. She did not look panicked. She did not call for help. She simply set the lighter on the mantel, turned to me, and offered a tight, practiced smile. "Such a shame. Dear," she whispered, stepping forward to brush a speck of non-existent dust from my shoulder. It was a bit ostentatious. Anyway, my throat closed. The heat from the fireplace baked my skin, but I felt freezing cold. I backed away from her, unable to form a single syllable. I turned and fled into the master bathroom, locking the heavy oak door behind me. I slid down the wall until I hit the cold marble floor, pulling my knees to my chest. As I dropped, my arm hit the counter, knocking Brenda's leather handbag off the edge. The bag hit the tiles with a heavy thud. A gold lipstick tube, a compact mirror, and a crumpled piece of hotel stationery spilled out near my feet. I stared at the mess for a long moment, listening to the crackle of my wedding dress burning in the next room. My hands shook as I reached out to shove her things back inside. My fingers brushed the crumpled stationery. It felt thick, expensive. I smoothed it out against my knee, expecting a dry cleaning ticket or a catering receipt. It was a handwritten note in Brenda's unmistakable looping cursive. My eyes scanned the blue ink. The first line was a 9-digit routing number. I recognized it instantly. It was the business line of credit for the pediatric speech therapy clinic I built from scratch over the last 5 years. Below that was a dollar amount, $150,000. Next to the number she had written the name of an offshore limited liability company. A business card for a local notary slipped out from the fold of the paper, landing face up on the marble. The tears stopped. The grief over a ruined dress evaporated, leaving behind a terrifying diamond-hard clarity. They were not just trying to ruin my wedding day. They were draining my life's work. Before I tell you what I did with that receipt, I need to know if you have ever trusted someone who was secretly plotting your ruin. Welcome to the Revenge Order channel. Please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you want to hear exactly how I turned the tables on a family of frauds. Drop a comment right now telling me your age, where you are watching from, and what time it is there. Now, let me take you back to the exact moment I realized the man I loved was handing my future over to his mother. Have you ever found a piece of paper that entirely rewrote your reality? I sat on the freezing marble floor of the hotel bathroom, staring at the string of 9 digits penned in Brenda Sterling's looping cursive. The stark fluorescent vanity lights buzzed softly above me, casting harsh shadows across the tile. The paper in my hand felt heavier than a brick. It was my pediatric speech therapy clinic's routing number. The offshore limited liability company name written next to it felt like a physical blow striking the center of my chest. $150,000. That was not a random number pulled from thin air. That was the exact maximum limit of my business credit line. It was the emergency account I used to keep the lights on and pay my dedicated therapists when the insurance companies delayed their reimbursements for months at a time. My mind began spinning, pulling up memories that suddenly looked entirely different under the cold glare of the truth. I thought about David. Charming, handsome David, with his tailored suits and his prestigious wealth management firm downtown. I remembered a specific dinner date we shared 6 months ago. We were sitting at a high-end Chicago steakhouse, sipping an expensive Cabernet. He had reached across the white linen tablecloth, took my hand in his, and looked deeply into my eyes. My mother and I are a team. Ellen, he told me that night. We share everything. We survived together. I thought it was incredibly sweet. I thought it demonstrated his profound loyalty to his widowed mother. I thought I was marrying into a tight-knit family that valued deep emotional connection. Now staring at the wire transfer details clutched in my trembling fingers, the truth washed over me like ice water. It was never family loyalty. It was a joint criminal enterprise. I was the mark. David had spent the past year carefully inserting himself into my finances. He offered to review my clinic tax returns, claiming he wanted to help me optimize my deductions. He suggested we merge our personal accounts for better interest rates, pretending to be my financial savior. When I asked questions about the complex forms he brought over, he would just smile, kiss my forehead, and tell me to let the professionals handle the boring math. He was never managing my wealth. He was just mapping out the vault before the heist. A memory hit me so hard it stole my breath. I was 24 years old, sitting in a cramped loan officer's cubicle at a local credit union. My hands were sweating so much I could barely grip the cheap plastic pen to sign the promissory note. I had put everything I owned on the line. Every dollar from my waitressing savings. Every ounce of my energy went into that signature. I had no wealthy family to back me up. I had no safety net to catch me if I failed. I just had a degree in speech pathology and a desperate burning need to build a safe space for children who needed help finding their voices. I remembered the very first month of holding that commercial lease. The space was a rundown strip mall unit in the suburbs with stained carpets and peeling beige wallpaper. I could not afford to hire professional contractors. I spent 14 nights in a row painting those walls a soft, calming yellow. I worked until 2 in the morning, surviving on lukewarm diner coffee and sheer adrenaline. My hands were covered in raw blisters from gripping the wooden roller brush. My lower back ADHD constantly from scrubbing years of grime off the baseboards. I spent hours sitting on the floor assembling tiny wooden chairs and organizing colorful foam floor mats. I sorted hundreds of picture cards for kids struggling with severe developmental delays. I built that pediatric practice from nothing. I poured my youth, my sweat, and my tears into the foundation of that clinic. It grew because I cared. It thrived because anxious parents trusted me with their nonverbal toddlers and their frustrated grade schoolers. I remembered a 5-year-old boy named Leo looking at a picture of an apple and speaking his very first clear word in my office while his mother wept in the waiting room. My clinic was not just a business. It was my heart made physical. It was a sanctuary. And a wire transfer of $150. 000 would bankrupt it instantly. It would mean firing my staff, breaking my lease, and abandoning the families who relied on me. The smell of my burning silk wedding dress crept under the gap in the bathroom door, pulling me back to the present moment. The acrid smoke stung my nostrils and burned the back of my throat. The sound of the flames snapping and popping in the other room suddenly sounded entirely different to me. It did not sound like a tragic accident. It sounded like a calculated strategy. I stood up, my knees popping against the cold tile. I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. My mascara was smeared down my pale cheeks. My eyes were bloodshot and swollen from crying over the dress. I looked exhausted, fragile, and broken. And that was exactly what Brenda wanted to see. The burning dress was a brilliant psychological diversion. It was a red herring designed to blind me. She set my custom gown on fire the night before the wedding to plunge me into a state of sheer panic and grief. She wanted me sobbing uncontrollably. She wanted me sleep-deprived. She wanted me so emotionally shattered that I would not have the energy or the mental clarity to fight back against whatever came next. Brenda knew I was a caretaker by nature. She knew my entire career was built on accommodating others and keeping the peace. If I was grieving a ruined piece of silk, I would not be checking my bank accounts. If I was hyperventilating over a dress, I would sign whatever urgent paperwork they put in front of me tomorrow morning just to make the pain stop and get through the day. They thought I would fold under the pressure. They thought my kindness was synonymous with weakness. I refused to let these parasites take my life away. I looked at the crumpled hotel stationery one last time, memorizing the offshore account name. The money had not been moved yet. The business card for the notary public was the final key. They needed a signature. My signature. They needed me legally bound to David to initiate the wire transfer and secure the theft. Tomorrow was not a wedding ceremony. It was a hostile corporate takeover masked by floral arrangements and champagne toasts. I needed to hide the paper. I folded the stationery into a tiny tight square and shoved it deep into the front pocket of my jeans. I gathered Brenda's gold lipstick tube and her compact mirror, shoving them haphazardly back into her designer purse. I left the handbag resting on the floor, making it look exactly like it had fallen during my frantic retreat from the fire. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed to wash my face. I needed to pretend I was still the naive, weeping bride they expected to see. I reached out and turned the cold water faucet, letting the stream run over my trembling fingers. Before I could splash the water onto my face, the brass handle of the bathroom door jiggled. The metal rattled sharply, breaking the quiet isolation of my sanctuary. I froze in place. The water continued to run over my wrists, but my blood ran colder. I watched the shadow of a pair of leather dress shoes appear in the narrow gap beneath the door. Ellen. David's voice drifted through the thick oak paneling. It was soft coaxing dripping with fake practiced concern. It was the exact tone he used when a restaurant got our order wrong or when he was pretending to care about a difficult day at my clinic. It was a performance. Are you in there, sweet girl? His tone was smooth like velvet covering a steel trap. My mom feels terrible about the fireplace. It was just a clumsy mistake. Please come out and let me hold you. We can fix this together. Just open the door. I stared at the heavy wooden panels separating us. The man standing on the other side was not my future husband. He was a thief waiting patiently to collect his prize. He was the man trying to bankrupt me and destroy everything I had built with my own 2 hands. I was trapped in a luxury hotel bathroom with the undeniable evidence of his crime burning a hole in my pocket. I had to unlock that door. I had to walk out there and look him directly in the eye. How could I possibly face the man who was planning to ruin my life without letting him see the war starting in my eyes? I stared at the brass door handle rattling in its frame. My hands shook. But my mind was already sprinting ahead, evaluating the threat. I reached into my jeans pocket and unfolded the crumpled hotel stationery. I pulled my phone from my back pocket, the screen brightness piercing the dim fluorescent shadows of the bathroom. I opened the camera application. My fingers trembled so hard the first image blurred into a chaotic smear of blue ink. I forced myself to inhale, holding the cold air steady in my lungs, and tapped the glass to focus the lens. The camera clicked. I captured the 9-digit routing number, the name of the offshore shell company, and the $150,000 figure. I flipped the local notary card over and photographed both sides, ensuring the contact information was perfectly legible. I opened my encrypted email portal. Running a medical practice meant I was bound by strict data privacy laws. So I maintained a secure remote cloud server for patient files. I attached the 3 images, typed a random sequence of letters into the subject line to obscure the contents, and pressed send. A faint swoosh sound from the speaker confirmed the files were safely stored miles away from this hotel room. I deleted the photos from my camera roll, then purged the deleted folder, leaving 0 trace on the device. I knelt back down beside Brenda's spilled designer handbag on the marble floor. I folded the stationery back into the exact same irregular hasty square. I tucked it deep into the side pocket of the purse. Wedged right next to the gold lipstick tube and the compact mirror, I arranged the spilled mints and tissues on the tiles, designing the scene to look as though I had simply knocked the bag off the counter while fleeing the fire in a state of blind, hysterical panic. David knocked again. The heavy oak wood rattled sharply. "Ellen. Sweet girl. Please. You are scaring my mother." I stood up and faced my reflection in the wide vanity mirror. My face was a blotchy canvas of running mascara and swollen eyelids. My hair clung to my damp forehead. Good. I needed to look like a shattered, heartbroken bride. I turned the cold water faucet on, splashing a handful of freezing water onto my cheeks to make the tear tracks look fresh and heavy. I took a ragged, shallow breath, intentionally forcing my chest to heave to mimic hyperventilation. I reached out and turned the brass lock. The door swung open. David stood in the threshold, framed by the warm amber light of the bridal suite. He wore a tailored navy suit, the jacket unbuttoned, looking like a catalog model playing the role of a deeply concerned groom. Beyond his shoulder, the gas fireplace flickered. The charred blackened remains of my custom silk gown lay in a smoking ruined heap on the ceramic logs. Brenda sat on the plush velvet sofa, legs crossed, sipping from a fresh glass of red wine, gazing at the wall art. David stepped forward and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, pulling me firmly against his chest. I let my body go completely limp, burying my face into his lapel. He smelled of expensive cedar cologne and spearmint, a sharp contrast to the acrid scent of burning fabric clinging to the air. The wool of his suit was soft, but holding him felt like embracing a stranger. "Sure," he murmured, his hand stroking the back of my hair in slow, rhythmic motions. "It is going to be okay. I promise you." I let out a muffled sob against his collarbone, sinking into the performance. "My dress. David. It is ruined. It is gone. I know. Sweet girl. I know," he said, his voice lowering into that soothing, resonant pitch he always utilized to win arguments and close business deals. "But you have to calm down. You are overreacting just a little bit. Do you not think? My mother feels terrible. It was just a clumsy mistake with the candle lighter. Her heel caught the rug." I kept my face buried in his jacket, but my eyes remained wide open. Her heel caught the rug. I had stood less than 5 feet away and watched her stand perfectly still, smile directly at me and ignite the lace hem. "A dress does not make a marriage, Ellen," David continued, his tone shifting smoothly from comforting to faintly scolding. "We are here to celebrate our partnership, not a piece of silk. You are making my mother feel like a criminal over a simple accident. We need to focus on the big picture. You can wear anything tomorrow. You would look beautiful in a paper bag." I nodded against his chest, squeezing my eyes shut to force a fresh tear down my cheek. I played the naive, accommodating therapist. I played the girl who always prioritized the feelings of others over her own boundaries. The woman who apologized when someone else stepped on her foot. That was the persona he chose to exploit. And that was the persona I needed to project to survive the next few hours. I shifted my weight slightly, opening my eyes to gaze over his shoulder. The large bathroom mirror reflected us holding each other in the doorway. It also captured David's left arm draped securely around my back. As he stroked my hair with his right hand, he subtly rotated his left wrist upward, angling it toward the light. His eyes darted away from my reflection in the glass. He stared intently at the face of his luxury PC Philippe watch. His jaw tightened imperceptibly. He was checking the time. He was holding his sobbing fiancé the night before their wedding, standing 10 feet away from the ashes of her dream gown. And he was bored. He was calculating how many more minutes of feigned empathy he had to endure before he could get back to his own schedule. He was on the clock. In that exact fraction of a second, watching his reflection in the silvered glass. Something inside my chest snapped shut. The overwhelming grief. The suffocating betrayal. The sheer panic of the last 20 minutes simply evaporated. It did not fade away over time. It vanished instantly, leaving behind a cold clinical vacuum. The trembling in my hands ceased. My heartbeat, which had been a frantic drum against my ribs, slowed to a steady, calculated march. I experienced a profound internal shift. I was no longer the heartbroken bride mourning a wedding that was never real. I was a tactician evaluating an active, dangerous threat in my environment. David and Brenda were a coordinated unit operating with a specific goal. They had planned this exact scenario, expecting me to crumble. They needed me compliant, weeping, and exhausted for whatever financial trap they were springing in the morning. If they required a broken, submissive victim, I would deliver an award-winning performance. I pulled back from his chest, sniffing loudly and wiping my nose with the back of my hand. I looked up at him with wide, watery eyes, letting my lower lip tremble. "You are right," I whispered, allowing my voice to crack perfectly on the final syllable. "You are right. I am sorry. I am just so overwhelmed and exhausted. The stress of the planning just got the better of me." David smiled, a smug, satisfied curve lifting the corners of his mouth. He reached up and wiped a stray smudge of mascara from my cheekbone with his thumb, playing the benevolent savior. "There is my reasonable girl. We just need to get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a beautiful day." I looked past him toward the sofa. Brenda raised her wine glass toward me in a silent mocking toast, her eyes glittering with dark amusement. "I just need to sleep," I said, wrapping my arms around my own waist, feigning a deep shiver. "I cannot look at the fireplace anymore. I need everyone to leave so I can close my eyes and try to forget tonight happened." "Of course," David said smoothly, already taking a step back toward the center of the room. He turned to his mother. "Let us go, Mom. Ellen needs her rest." Brenda stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her designer skirt. She walked toward the heavy suite door, pausing just as she passed me. "Get some sleep, dear. You look quite dreadful. We will send up a makeup artist early to work some magic on those eyes." I nodded, keeping my gaze lowered to the carpet in an act of total surrender. "Thank you, Brenda." David leaned in and kissed my forehead. A dry, perfunctory press of his lips that made my skin crawl. "I will see you at the altar," he whispered. "I will be there," I replied softly. I watched them walk out into the quiet carpeted hallway of the boutique hotel. David gently pulled the heavy oak door shut behind them, his face maintaining that mask of polite concern until the very last second. The brass latch clicked into place. I did not move for 5 full seconds. I stood frozen, listening to the muffled sound of their footsteps fading down the long corridor. Once the silence of the room settled around me, the fragile weeping facade dropped entirely. I reached forward and threw the heavy metal deadbolt. I latched the steel security chain, sliding it firmly into its groove. I stepped away from the door, turning my back on the smoldering remains of my wedding dress. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up my phone. The digital clock on the screen glowed brightly in the dim room. It was exactly 2 in the morning. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled past the wedding planner, past the caterer, past the florist, and past David's name. I stopped on a number I had not dialed in 6 months. It belonged to the woman who had taught my rigorous graduate business seminars. She was the woman who had quietly provided the critical seed capital for my clinic when traditional banks laughed at my ambitious business plan. She was a retired forensic accountant who treated corporate fraud like a competitive blood sport. She was my silent investor, my mentor, and the most ruthless, brilliant person I knew. I pressed the call button and lifted the phone to my ear. I listened to the electronic tone ringing in the dark. Silent hotel room. The stakes had never been higher. My clinic, my livelihood, and my entire financial future hung by a thread. Threatened by the very people who were supposed to become my new family. I needed an ally who understood the complex mechanics of money and deceit. Someone who could trace a lie through a maze of banking codes. The line rang only once. The call connected and a sharp, wide-awake voice came through the speaker, radiating a terrifying, focused energy. Completely ready for war. Sylvia Hayes did not knock like a normal hotel guest. She delivered a sharp rhythmic sequence against the heavy oak paneling. At exactly 2:30 in the morning, I released the deadbolt, throwing the door open to the quiet corridor. She stepped inside a 62-year-old hurricane wrapped in a tailored charcoal blazer. A reinforced canvas laptop bag hung from her right shoulder. Her silver bob was perfectly styled, untouched by the late hour. She did not gasp when she saw the charred, smoking ruins of my custom gown piled inside the fireplace. She merely adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, her eyes sweeping the bridal suite like a general surveying a compromised battlefield. I navigated the length of the room, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet, wearing a desperate track across the floorboards. Sylvia ignored the ash. She strode directly to the small kitchenette. She ripped open a foil packet of dark roast, slid the paper filter into the plastic machine, and poured bottled water into the reservoir. The mundane domestic action anchored the chaotic energy vibrating through the walls. The scent of brewing coffee began to mask the lingering odor of melted silk. I watched her methodically prepare the ceramic mugs. This woman had failed half my graduating class during our capstone business seminar at the university. When traditional loan officers rejected my pediatric clinic proposal due to my youth, she reviewed my binders, wrote a generous seed capital check, and became my silent partner. She had spent 3 decades hunting corporate embezzlers as a leading forensic accountant before retiring to teach. Nobody stole from her students. Furthermore, no individual dared to touch her financial investments. I handed her my unlocked phone. The screen displayed the photographed hotel stationery, revealing the 9-digit routing number, the offshore limited liability company, and the forged notary business card. Sylvia set her beverage on the glass table. She retrieved a sleek matte black computer from her bag. Powering the device up, she connected to a secure virtual private network, masking our location. Her manicured fingers flew across the keyboard, executing rapid commands, bypassing standard security firewalls using administrative backdoors she helped design during her corporate tenure. I stood behind her chair watching lines of code and financial databases reflect in the lenses of her glasses. 10 minutes passed in tense silence. Then a low hum of dark amusement vibrated in her throat. "Your handsome groom is a phantom, Ellen." She rotated the monitor toward me. The screen displayed a complex web of financial charts. Everything was highlighted in stark, alarming crimson deficits, bankruptcies, defaulted commercial loans. His wealth management portfolio is entirely fictitious, she explained, her tone devoid of sympathy, focusing only on the data. He holds catastrophic debt. The firm he boasts about downtown is an empty shell leasing a virtual office space to maintain appearances. My stomach plummeted. But the offshore account? I stammered, trying to make sense of the incoming information. How are they moving $150? 000 if he has nothing? Sylvia tapped a specific node on the digital flowchart because he is not the mastermind. Look at the origin point of his remaining operating capital. It flows downward from a master trust controlled exclusively by Brenda Sterling. She holds the purse strings. David is merely her employee, her bait. She opened another window revealing public records and archived legal disputes. Sylvia traced the pattern with chilling precision. 3 years ago. He engaged a highly successful orthodontist. 5 years ago. A regional retail franchise owner. He charms empathetic, high-earning women. Brenda orchestrates the asset extraction to sustain her lavish country club existence, settling his localized debts just enough to maintain the illusion of his wealth. Once they drain the target, they discard the victim. You are simply their latest acquisition. The realization paralyzed me. Every sweet gesture, every romantic vacation, every supportive text message was a calculated business expense. I was a host organism being prepped for a financial harvest. The betrayal sliced through my chest, severing any remaining affection I held for the man sleeping down the hall. We are not going to be casualties today, Sylvia declared, pulling a secondary encrypted cell phone from her blazer pocket. She dialed a contact speaking in hushed authoritative tones to a senior corporate attorney operating on the opposite coast where courts were opening soon. They cannot steal what you do not legally possess, the older woman explained, ending the call and drafting rapid legal frameworks on her word processor. We are transferring your entire medical practice, the building lease, the specialized equipment, and the operating accounts into a newly formed irrevocable trust. I will act as the temporary fiduciary trustee, effective immediately. Your net worth on paper is 0. Your clinic belongs to the isolated legal entity. If Brenda forces a predatory asset transfer upon you this morning, you will sign away a hollow shell. Sylvia retrieved a portable travel printer from the bottom of her bag. She connected the cable. The machine whirred to life, spitting out pages of dense legal jargon. I grabbed a blue pen, signing my name across the dotted lines, legally separating myself from the empire I built, placing it behind an impenetrable fortress of paperwork. However, defense was insufficient. Sylvia pivoted to offense. She accessed a restricted federal portal, her credentials, granting her immediate entry. She began filing an expedited suspicious activity report. The local authorities might arrest him for a domestic dispute, she murmured, typing a detailed summary of the forged quit-claim deed and the planned wire fraud. But the federal government will bury him for interstate financial crimes. I am sending this directly to my former colleagues at the Treasury Department. It flags his social security number, freezing his remaining hidden assets, pending a federal inquiry. The trap is primed. I walked toward the large suite window, pulling back the heavy blackout curtains. Dawn was breaking over the Illinois suburbs. The sky shifted from a bruised purple into a bleeding, fiery orange. The wedding was scheduled to begin in exactly 6 hours. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, displaying a morning greeting text from the man trying to ruin me. The quiet hum of the laptop fan ceased as Sylvia closed the lid. The sharp click echoed in the stillness of the room. She adjusted her glasses, locking her sharp gaze onto mine. Do we call the police now? She asked, her voice steady and chilling. Or do we put on a show? I looked at the older woman sitting across from me in the dim hotel light. Her posture was rigid, her expression awaiting my command. I thought about the thousands of hours I spent building my pediatric clinic. I thought about the raw blisters on my hands from painting those suburban walls in the middle of the night. I thought about the fraudulent wealth my fiancé paraded around Chicago, funded entirely by the labor of women he deceived. We put on a show, I told Sylvia. My voice carried no tremor. Sylvia nodded, a fierce glint illuminating her eyes behind her wire-rimmed lenses. She gathered her electronics, zipping her reinforced canvas bag closed. She gave me brief tactical instructions for the upcoming hours before slipping out the heavy oak door, vanishing into the early morning shadows to orchestrate our counter-offensive. I was left alone with the ashes of my former life. The smell of the burnt silk lingered in the upholstery. I needed armor for the impending battle. At 8 in the morning, I walked out of the boutique hotel lobby into the crisp Illinois air. I drove my modest sedan to a sprawling suburban shopping center. The parking lot was virtually empty, the asphalt slick with morning dew. I waited by the locked glass doors of a mid-tier department store, shivering slightly in the chill, watching the uniformed security guard slowly turn the key from the inside. I bypassed the high-end formal wear boutiques. I ignored the racks of imported silk, delicate chiffon, and intricate lace. I walked directly into the casual spring collection. My fingers grazed the various textiles, feeling the weave of the fabrics until they stopped on a simple, structured garment. It was a plain white cotton sundress. It featured a modest neckline, thick straps, and a hem that fell just below the knee. I checked the cardboard tag dangling from the sleeve. $150. I carried the wooden hanger to the cash register. The teenage cashier blinked at me, stifling a yawn, oblivious to the fact that she was ringing up bridal attire. She folded the dress into a plastic bag, handing me the receipt. I walked back to my car holding the thin shopping bag. The destroyed custom gown in my hotel fireplace had cost $18,000. It required specialized handling, careful preservation, and delicate movement. It represented the entire illusion of the Sterling family. It was expensive, fragile, and highly combustible. It took merely seconds for Brenda to reduce it to a pile of worthless ash. The cotton sundress resting on my passenger seat was entirely different. It was practical. It was sturdy. You could throw it in a washing machine, bleach it, and wear it into the dirt. It did not pretend to be something greater than its woven fibers. It represented the unvarnished, indestructible truth. I felt an incredible surge of power gripping the leather steering wheel. I was no longer playing their game of status and pretense. I was changing the rules. I returned to the bridal suite just before 10 o'clock. The heavy door swung open, revealing a flurry of chaotic activity. Two of my bridesmaids were steaming their lavender dresses in the corner. A hired makeup artist was unpacking a sprawling kit of brushes, sponges, and palettes on the marble vanity. Brenda stood in the center of the room holding a porcelain cup of herbal tea. She wore an immaculate silver pantsuit, every hair sprayed into rigid perfection. When she saw the plastic shopping bag dangling from my wrist, she inhaled sharply, pressing her manicured hand against her chest in a theatrical display of shock. "Ellen, dear," she gasped, stepping forward. "What on earth is that? Did you not visit the luxury bridal salon downtown? I told you, David would cover any expedited fees to ensure you looked presentable." I pulled the cotton dress from the bag, laying it flat across the unmade bed. "I do not have the energy for a fitting," I murmured, keeping my tone subdued and defeated. "This will have to do." Brenda stared at the cheap garment. She attempted to maintain a look of profound pity, but a distinct, unmistakable gleam of smug satisfaction danced in her eyes. She believed her psychological warfare had yielded a flawless victory. She looked at me and saw a broken, humiliated woman who had surrendered her dignity and accepted a meager scrap of fabric for her wedding day. She thought she had established absolute dominance. She moved swiftly, seizing control of the environment like a prison warden. She turned to my bridesmaids, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Girls, why do you not head down to the courtyard and ensure the florist has arranged the arbor correctly? Ellen needs a serene, quiet space to compose herself after last night's tragedy." My friends hesitated, casting worried glances in my direction. I offered them a tired nod, signaling my compliance. They gathered their things and exited the suite, leaving me isolated with the architect of my misery. Brenda then approached the side table, picking up my cellular phone. She dropped the device into her deep leather purse, snapping the golden clasp shut with a definitive click. "Let us remove all distractions," she instructed, patting my arm gently. "No calls. No text messages. Just breathe. Dear, we must focus on getting you down that aisle." I offered no resistance. I did not require my phone. The trap was already primed. The federal authorities were notified and the irrevocable trust was sealed. Let her believe she was severing my lifeline. She was merely cutting her own throat. I sat in the tall leather chair facing the vanity mirror. The makeup artist draped a protective cape over my shoulders, his eyes darting nervously between me and the older woman hovering nearby. The cold, damp sponge pressed against my skin, applying a thick layer of foundation to mask the exhaustion. The smell of setting spray and heated styling irons filled the small space. Brenda leaned against the doorframe, letting out a long, dramatic sigh. She looked at the stylist, shaking her head with an expression of profound martyrdom. "Do your best with her," Brenda instructed, her voice carrying a sharp edge of condescension. "The poor thing suffered a terrible accident last night. We are working with very limited elegance today. Try to make her look acceptable. At least. We have very important investors arriving shortly." The stylist swallowed hard, blending the makeup along my jawline. He whispered an apology under his breath, clearly intimidated by the wealthy matriarch scrutinizing his every move. I did not flinch. I did not defend myself. I stared at my reflection in the glass and allowed a slow, eerie smile to stretch across my face. It was a placid, unnerving expression that caused the stylist to pause his work for a fraction of a second. I was not looking at the makeup, the ruined hotel room, or the smug woman standing behind me. My mind projected a vivid image of the manicured lawn outside. I visualized Sylvia Hayes walking down the grassy center aisle. I pictured my fierce mentor taking her designated seat in the front row directly behind the groom's position. I imagined the thick manila folder resting heavily on Sylvia's lap, packed with printed bank records, forged deed copies, and federal tracking numbers. The quiet hum of the suite was suddenly broken by a faint melodic sound drifting through the open window. A string quartet had begun tuning their instruments on the venue grounds below. The unmistakable opening chords of a traditional wedding march echoed through the crisp morning air, signaling the approaching hour. Brenda checked her diamond watch. She clapped her hands together, a sharp authoritative sound that made the makeup artist jump. "Thank you. That will be all," she told the stylist, pointing toward the exit. "She looks as good as she is going to get. I need a private moment with my future daughter before the ceremony begins." The artist quickly packed his brushes, eager to escape the suffocating tension. He scurried out of the room, pulling the door shut behind him. The brass latch clicked into place. The suite fell dead silent, save for the distant, cheerful music drifting from the courtyard. Brenda walked over to the door. She reached out and turned the heavy metal deadbolt, locking us inside. The sound echoed like a steel gate sealing shut. She turned to face me, the artificial warmth draining entirely from her features, replaced by a cold, calculating, predatory glare. She reached into her designer handbag. Her fingers bypassed the gold lipstick tube and the compact mirror. Instead, she pulled out a dense stapled stack of legal documents, the bright white paper stark and threatening in the morning light. The heavy brass deadbolt slid into place with a sharp metallic thud echoing through the quiet bridal suite. Brenda Sterling stood by the door for a long moment, her back turned toward me. The cheerful classical music drifting up from the courtyard below felt like it belonged to an entirely different universe. In this room, the air had grown stagnant and thick. When Brenda finally pivoted to face me, the transformation was staggering. The artificial warmth she had worn since the rehearsal dinner evaporated. The practiced maternal smile vanished, leaving her features rigid and sharp. Her eyes narrowed into dark, calculating slits. She no longer looked like a concerned future mother-in-law trying to comfort a grieving bride. She looked like a predator who had successfully cornered her prey and was now preparing to feast. She marched toward the center of the room, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. She reached into her expansive designer handbag and withdrew a thick stapled stack of legal documents. She dropped the papers onto the glass coffee table with a definitive slap. "We have one final piece of business to conclude before you walk down that aisle, Ellen," she stated, her voice dropping an octave into a cold, commanding register. I remained seated in the tall leather vanity chair wearing my cheap cotton sundress. I stared at the dense packet of stark white paper resting on the glass surface. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my tone soft and submissive, playing the role of the exhausted, defeated target she expected me to be. "It is a standard last-minute prenuptial agreement," Brenda lied smoothly, not missing a beat. "David has very prominent backers attending today. Men who control millions of dollars in capital. They require a basic security guarantee before they allow him to formally tie his personal estate to yours. It is merely a formality to protect his corporate assets. You understand how these high-end net worth protocols operate, do you not?" I stood up slowly, closing the distance between us. I leaned over the glass table and looked at the top page. I did not need a law degree to decipher the bold print at the header. It was not a prenuptial agreement. It was an interspousal asset transfer contract. My eyes scanned the first few paragraphs. The legal jargon was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. The document specifically listed the exact tax identification number of my pediatric speech therapy clinic. It contained clauses dictating that upon the legal solemnization of our marriage, all of my business holdings, real estate, leases, proprietary patient contracts, and future revenue streams would instantly merge with David's primary holding company. Worse than the theft of my assets was the assumption of his burdens. Section 4 of the document explicitly stated that both parties would share equal liability for any pre-existing commercial debts. David was drowning in unpayable loans and fabricated investments. Brenda was not just trying to steal my thriving clinic. She was attempting to legally shackle me to the sinking ship of her son's fraudulent empire. The moment I said I do, his catastrophic financial ruin would become my legal responsibility. They were throwing me over the edge with an anvil chained to my ankle to keep themselves afloat. I felt a cold rush of adrenaline flood my veins. The sheer audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. I hesitated, hovering my hand over the paper to maintain the illusion of uncertainty. I am not sure I feel comfortable signing something this dense without having an attorney review it first. "Brenda, it seems very complicated." Brenda stepped forward, closing the physical distance between us. She invaded my personal space, boxing me in between the heavy velvet armchair and the edge of the glass table. She towered over me, her immaculate silver pants suit contrasting sharply with my simple unadorned white dress. The scent of her expensive floral perfume was suffocating. "You do not have time for an attorney, Ellen," she hissed, her voice tight and threatening. "Look out that window." She pointed a manicured finger toward the sheer curtains. 150 people are sitting in folding chairs on the manicured lawn right now. The caterers are currently plating the imported appetizers. The string quartet is playing your entrance music. Your friends and colleagues are waiting to watch you marry the man of your dreams. She leaned closer, her eyes flashing with malice. "Do you truly want to walk out there and tell every single person you know that the wedding is can-led because you were too selfish to sign a simple piece of paper? Do you want to humiliate yourself and David in front of Chicago's elite over a standard business formality? Sign the document, Ellen. Do not ruin this day for my son." She reached into the pocket of her tailored jacket and withdrew a heavy gold designer pen. She held it out to me. When I did not immediately take it, She lowered her hand and began tapping the metal tip against the glass coffee table. Tick, tick, tick. The rhythmic sound was harsh, impatient, and designed to break my resolve. It was a metronome counting down the seconds to my supposed ruin. Brenda stood there radiating triumphant arrogance. She was aggressively gloating over a victory she believed was already secured. She looked at my cheap dress and my lack of defense and thought she had conquered me. The dramatic irony of the moment tasted sweet in my mouth. Brenda Sterling thought she was orchestrating the ultimate heist. She believed this signature would grant her total control over my life's work. She did not know that less than 6 hours ago, Sylvia Hayes and I had sat in this exact suite executing a flawless midnight audit. She did not know that Sylvia had already engaged a coastal corporate attorney utilizing emergency legal protocols to transfer every single asset, piece of equipment, and operational account into a newly formed blind irrevocable trust. On paper, Ellen Lilly owned 0 commercial assets: the thriving pediatric clinic, the building lease, and the revenue streams belonged to an isolated legal entity that David and Brenda could never touch. Brenda was bullying me to surrender my kingdom, having no idea the castle was already gone. If I signed this document, I would not be giving her my business. I would be legally transferring an empty hollow shell. She was standing in front of me trying to steal a ghost. The rhythmic tapping of the gold pen on the glass table continued, echoing the frantic heartbeat she assumed I was experiencing. Tick, tick, tick. I looked down at the predatory clauses printed on the stark white paper. I read the lines attempting to bind my future to their fraudulent debts. Then I slowly lifted my gaze to meet Brenda's dark, demanding eyes. I did not cry. I did not shrink away from her towering posture. I did not offer the fearful apologies she was waiting to hear. Instead, the corners of my mouth began to turn upward. The expression stretched across my face, forming a genuine, terrifying smile. It was not a polite gesture. It was the smile of a hunter watching a trap spring shut around its prey. Brenda faltered. The rhythmic tapping of the pen stopped abruptly. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, an unsettling flicker of doubt crossing her perfectly powdered face. She had expected weeping compliance or hysterical resistance. She did not know how to process a bride smiling into the teeth of her extortion. "You are right, Brenda," I whispered, my voice steady and smooth, carrying no trace of the sorrow I had performed all morning. "We certainly do not want to keep the guests waiting. It would be a terrible shame to ruin such a beautiful day." I reached out, bridging the narrow gap between us. I wrapped my fingers around the heavy gold designer pen, sliding it effortlessly from her manicured grasp. The metal felt cold and substantial in my hand. I lowered my gaze back to the thick packet of paper resting on the glass table. I pulled the contract closer, aligning the stark black signature line directly in front of me, pressing the gold tip firmly against the page. The gold tip of the designer pen hovered above the stark white paper for a fraction of a second. I did not write a fake name. I did not draw a line through the document. I pressed the ink firmly onto the page and signed my legal name, Ellen Lilly, in clear, steady cursive. I completed the signature with a definitive loop. Capping the heavy pen, I lifted the entire packet of predatory asset transfer documents from the glass coffee table and handed it directly back to Brenda Sterling. "Here you go," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of the fearful tremor she expected. "I hope this satisfies David's very prominent backers. We would not want them to worry about his corporate assets." Brenda snatched the thick stack of papers from my grasp, her eyes gleaming with a hungry, triumphant light. She did not bother to scan the signature or verify the date. She clutched the forged contract to her chest, victorious and entirely blind to the trap that had just snapped shut around her. She believed she was holding the legal keys to my flourishing pediatric speech therapy clinic. She had no idea she was gripping a legally binding agreement, transferring zero tangible assets from an empty hollow shell company. I had just handed her exactly nothing. Wonderful. Dear, Brenda murmured, the artificial warmth flooding back into her tone now that she possessed what she wanted. You made the right choice. Now, let us get you down that aisle. David is waiting. She turned sharply on her heel, her immaculate silver pants suit swishing as she unlocked the heavy brass deadbolt. She did not look back. She strode out of the bridal suite, eager to take her designated seat at the front of the manicured lawn, carrying the paperwork that would soon become the cornerstone of her own federal indictment. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the quiet room. I stood in the center of the suite, smoothing the front of my cheap white cotton sundress. The fabric felt rough against my palms, sturdy and unpretentious. The $18,000 silk gown I was supposed to wear lay in a pile of charred ash in the fireplace, smelling of ozone and ruined dreams. I did not shed another tear. The grief had been entirely replaced by a cold, calculating adrenaline. The time for mourning a fictitious relationship was over. A gentle knock rattled the doorframe. The wedding coordinator poked her head inside, holding a sleek clipboard. It is time. Miss Lily, she whispered, offering a sympathetic smile, clearly aware of the morning's wardrobe disaster, but too professional to comment. The bridal party has already processed. You are next. I nodded, grabbing my simple bouquet of white hydrangeas from the side table. I followed her out into the bright Illinois morning. The transition from the dim hotel hallway to the sprawling sunlit courtyard was blinding. The air smelled of cut grass and expensive floral arrangements. As I stepped onto the stone pathway leading to the outdoor seating area, the string quartet shifted their melody. The unmistakable soaring chords of the traditional wedding march swelled across the venue. I began my walk down the long white carpeted aisle. I was entirely alone. I did not have a father to give me away. Having lost him to a sudden illness during my freshman year of college, I had navigated my entire adult life independently, securing my own business loans, signing my own commercial leases, and building my clinic from the ground up. Walking this path alone felt entirely appropriate. However, I was acutely aware of the audience. 150 people were seated in the pristine white folding chairs. As I emerged into view, a collective audible gasp rippled through the crowd. I felt the weight of 300 eyes immediately lock onto my attire. The guests had arrived expecting a lavish high society spectacle. They were staring at a bride wearing a $150 cotton sundress pulled straight off a suburban department store rack. Whispers broke out among the back rows. My aunts exchanged confused, horrified glances. David's wealthy associates murmured to their wives, pointing discreetly at my unadorned hemline. I kept my spine rigid, my chin parallel to the ground. I did not look at the whispering guests. I did not look at my bewildered bridesmaids standing near the arbor. I focused my gaze entirely on the end of the aisle. David stood at the altar framed by a massive arch of imported white roses. He was the picture of a devoted, emotional groom. He wore a custom-tailored navy tuxedo, a fresh white binier pinned to his lapel. As I approached, I watched him lift a pristine white handkerchief to his cheek, dabbing at a solitary, perfectly timed tear escaping his eye. He looked like a man utterly overwhelmed by love. The stark contrast between his charming, teary-eyed facade and the absolute monster I now knew him to be was dizzying. This was the man who had spent the last 12 months studying my financial habits. This was the man who had smiled across dinner tables, kissing my forehead while actively mapping out a strategy to drain the emergency funds I used to pay my clinical staff. This was the man who had allowed his mother to set my wedding dress on fire simply to exhaust me into signing away my life's work. He was a parasite wearing a tailored suit, performing grief for an audience of marks. I reached the end of the aisle. Stepping up onto the slightly elevated wooden platform, I turned to face him. Clutching my hydrangeas, David reached out, taking my left hand in his. His grip was warm, solid, and entirely fictitious. He leaned forward, closing the distance between us, until his lips brushed my ear. "You look beautiful anyway," he whispered. The words were soft, seemingly supportive, yet laced with a subtle narcissistic condescension. He could not resist twisting the knife, ensuring I knew I was presenting a substandard image, subtly reminding me of the trauma his mother had inflicted the night before. He believed he was comforting a broken woman. He had no idea he was standing next to an active explosive device. "Thank you, David," I murmured, keeping my expression perfectly neutral, offering a small, placid smile. We turned to face the officiant, an older, distinguished man holding a leather-bound ceremonial book. He adjusted his microphone, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the outdoor venue, commanding the attention of the murmuring crowd. "Welcome family and friends," the officiant began, smiling warmly at the assembled guests. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Ellen and David. A marriage is not merely a legal contract. It is a profound partnership built on a foundation of absolute trust, unwavering honesty, and mutual respect. It requires two people to come together, stripping away all pretense, to share their lives, their burdens, and their futures transparently." The irony of his words hung heavily in the crisp air. I glanced to my right. In the very first row, sitting directly behind David's groomsmen, was Sylvia Hayes. My fierce former business professor sat perfectly straight, her tailored charcoal blazer immaculate. Resting heavily on her lap was a thick, bulging manila folder packed with printed banking records, forged quick-claim copies, and federal tracking numbers. She caught my eye and offered a single imperceptible nod. "The arsenal was ready. I want to stop here for a moment and ask you a direct question. If you were standing in my cheap cotton shoes, staring at the man who had secretly orchestrated your financial ruin, listening to an officiant speak about unwavering honesty, what would you do? Would you have possessed the sheer nerve to make it this far down the aisle, standing inches away from the thief? Or would you have packed your bags and run the night before? Tell me in the comments right now." The officiant continued his address, moving through the standard introductory remarks, speaking eloquently about the merging of two distinct paths into a single journey. David squeezed my hand, offering a reassuring practice smile, playing his role flawlessly for the wealthy investors sitting a few rows back. And now the officiant announced, his tone growing formal, shifting into the traditional procedural phase of the ceremony. "Before we proceed with the exchange of vows, I must ask if there is anyone present who knows any just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony. Speak now or forever hold your peace." The officiant paused, letting the heavy ceremonial question hang over the audience. It was a rhetorical formality, a moment that usually passes in absolute respectful silence. The venue was completely dead silent. Only the faint rustle of the wind blowing through the white roses broke the stillness. Brenda shifted comfortably in her front row seat, her designer handbag resting near her feet. Confident her heist was secured, David maintained his loving, expectant gaze, ready to say his lines. I let the silence stretch for 3 full seconds, allowing the tension to settle over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Then I slowly released David's hand, letting my fingers slip from his warm grasp. I took a single deliberate step backward, distancing myself from the altar and the man standing upon it. The wooden planks of the elevated altar creaked softly beneath my cheap cotton shoes as I took that deliberate step backward. The officiant paused mid-breath, his mouth hanging open in a silent shape of confusion. His hands tightened around his leather-bound ceremonial book. Unsure if he had misspoken or missed a cue in the program. He looked at David. Then back to me. Waiting for a correction. I did not look at my groom. I kept my eyes fixed on the older man standing between us. "Excuse me," I said. My voice steady and calm, projecting a clinical authority that demanded compliance. "May I borrow your microphone for just a moment?" The officiant blinked his professional composure, fracturing. He glanced down at the black wireless microphone gripped in his right hand. He had performed hundreds of weddings, but nothing in his theological training prepared him for a bride halting the ceremony to request the sound system. Autopilot took over. He slowly extended his arm, offering me the device. I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal handle, pulling it toward my chest. The faint hum of the amplified feedback buzzed over the large outdoor speakers positioned around the manicured courtyard. 150 guests shifted in their white folding chairs. The rustling of expensive fabrics and the clearing of throats signaled a rising tide of discomfort. I turned my back to the altar facing the sea of bewildered faces. The bright Illinois sun cast long shadows across the grass. I found Sylvia Hayes in the front row, sitting perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the thick manila folder in her lap. She offered nothing but a steady, calculating stare. "Thank you all for traveling here today," I began, my voice booming across the venue, ringing clear and sharp through the crisp morning air. "I know many of you rearranged your schedules, booked flights, and purchased gifts to celebrate a partnership. However, I must apologize for the inconvenience. There will be no wedding today." A collective gasp ripped through the audience. It was not a subtle sound. It was a sharp intake of breath from 150 people simultaneously realizing they were witnessing a spectacular disaster. Whispers erupted immediately in the back rows. Aunts clutched their pearl necklaces. David's wealthy business associates leaned forward, their eyes darting between me and the man standing behind me. David reacted with the smooth, practiced agility of a seasoned con artist. He stepped forward, instantly shifting into the role of the deeply embarrassed, protective groom attempting to manage a hysterical woman. "Ellen, sweet girl, what are you doing?" he whispered, his tone dripping with patronizing concern. Though his jaw was clenched so tight the muscles twitched, he reached out, extending his hand toward my waist, attempting to physically guide me away from the edge of the platform and away from the crowd. I pivoted smoothly, slipping out of his reach before his fingers could graze the fabric of my dress. "Do not touch me, David," I said, the microphone catching the icy warning in my tone and broadcasting it to every person on the lawn. His hand dropped to his side. The charming facade began to crack, revealing a flicker of genuine panic beneath his tailored navy suit. "Many of you have been whispering about my attire since I walked down the aisle." I continued addressing the audience directly, holding their undivided attention. "I am wearing a $150 cotton sundress straight off a clearance rack. I am wearing it because late last night, my $18,000 custom silk gown was burned to ash inside the fireplace of our hotel suite." The murmurs in the crowd escalated into audible exclamations of shock. Brenda Sterling, sitting in the front row, stiffened. Her impeccable posture went rigid, her hands gripping the edges of her designer handbag. "It was not a tragic accident," I explained, gripping the microphone tighter. "It was a calculated psychological tactic." My future mother-in-law stood over the hearth holding a candle lighter and watched my dress melt. She wanted me sobbing, sleep-deprived, and broken today. She needed me exhausted so I would not possess the mental clarity to fight back against the paperwork she planned to force upon me this morning. David took another step toward me, his voice dropping into a harsh, desperate hiss meant only for my ears. "Shut your mouth, Ellen. You are ruining everything." I ignored him, keeping my gaze locked on the wealthy investors sitting a few rows back. But the ruined dress was merely a distraction. I announced it was a smokey-ox screen designed to hide a much larger theft. I paused, letting the word theft echo across the quiet courtyard. When Brenda knocked her purse off the bathroom counter last night, a piece of hotel stationery fell out. It contained a handwritten note detailing a 9-digit routing number. That routing number belongs to the business line of credit for my pediatric speech therapy clinic. A clinic I built from the ground up, working 14-hour days to create a sanctuary for children who struggle to find their voices. The audience fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The sheer gravity of the accusation paralyzed the crowd. Written directly beneath my clinic routing number, I continued, my voice rising in volume and intensity, was the exact figure of $150. 000. Next to that was the name of an offshore shell company and a business card for a local notary public. They did not just want a lavish wedding. They intended to use a predatory asset transfer contract hidden within a fake prenuptial agreement to drain my operating accounts and steal my life work the very second I said I do. I turned around to face David. The blood had drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale grey. The confident, charming wealth manager had vanished. He looked like a trapped animal, standing beneath the arch of imported white roses. His eyes darted frantically, searching for an exit, a lie, or a plausible excuse. He had spent the last year carefully studying my empathetic nature, assuming I would never possess the spine to cause a public scene. He severely underestimated the protective rage of a woman defending her own survival. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice failed him. He instinctively raised his left hand, running his fingers through his hair, a nervous tick exposing his wrist to the bright sunlight. The silver face of his luxury timepiece glinted in the light. It was the same watch he obsessively checked last night while holding me in the doorway, pretending to offer comfort while counting the seconds until he could leave. I looked down at the metal band, then back up into his terrified eyes. "By the way, David," I said, lifting the microphone so the entire venue could hear the final devastating insult. "My financial auditor ran the serial number on that PC Philippe watch you love checking so much. The one you claim you bought after closing your first $1 million fund. It is a cheap fake just like your entire portfolio." The declaration landed like a physical blow. The wealthy businessmen sitting in the second row exchanged dark, alarmed glances. These were men who recognized the difference between genuine success and a hollow facade. The mention of a fake portfolio triggered an immediate shift in their posture. They were no longer wedding guests watching family drama. They were sharks smelling blood in the water, realizing they were sitting next to a sinking ship. David stepped back, his mouth falling open in silent shock. He looked down at his wrist, then over toward his mother, begging for a rescue. Brenda Sterling realized the illusion was shattering beyond repair. Her carefully constructed high society empire was burning to the ground faster than my silk dress. She leaped up from her front row folding chair, knocking it backward onto the grass with a sharp clatter. "She is having a psychotic break," Brenda screamed, her shrill voice cutting through the murmuring crowd. Her hands waved wildly in the air, a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "Do not listen to a word she is saying. The stress of the wedding has caused a mental collapse. Someone turn off that microphone. She is sick. She needs medical intervention." Brenda pointed a manicured finger at me, her face contorted in a mask of furious self-righteous indignation. She played the victim flawlessly, crying out for the audience to pity her son and ignore the mad woman at the altar. David saw the opening his mother provided. The verbal defense had failed. The charm had evaporated. The only option left was to physically stop the bleeding before I could reveal any more details about his hollow shell company. His eyes darkened, narrowing into a look of raw, unfiltered rage. He lunged forward, closing the narrow gap between us in a single violent stride, his hands reaching out to rip the microphone away from my face. David closed the narrow distance between us in a single jagged stride. His leather dress shoes scraped harshly against the wooden planks of the altar. His arm extended forward, his fingers curling into a desperate claw, aimed directly at the black metal microphone I held near my chest. The polished, charming groom had vanished, leaving behind a cornered thief willing to use physical force to silence his accuser. Before his fingertips could graze the electronic device, a sharp authoritative voice sliced through the humid morning air. "That is quite far enough, David." The command did not come from me. It originated from the front of the seating area, ringing with a resonant, unyielding power that immediately froze David in his tracks. His hand hovered in midair, his eyes darting toward the source of the interruption. Sylvia Hayes rose from her white folding chair in the second row. She smoothed the lapels of her tailored charcoal blazer, projecting a commanding presence that dwarfed the lavish floral arrangements surrounding us. For over 30 years, Sylvia had operated as a senior forensic auditor, dismantling complex embezzlement networks and exposing hidden offshore accounts for federal regulators. She spent her career dissecting the elaborate lies of desperate executives before retiring to the university lecture hall. She taught her business students how to build ethical, sustainable enterprises. Today, she was stepping out of retirement to demonstrate precisely how to execute a corporate predator. She walked into the wide, grassy center aisle carrying a stack of thick, neatly bound dossier. She did not spare a single glance for the sputtering groom on the platform. Her steely gaze was fixed entirely on the 3 older gentlemen seated adjacent to her former spot. These 3 men wore bespoke wool suits that cost more than my entire first-year clinic budget. They were not distant relatives or childhood friends of the Sterling family. They were prominent venture capitalists and private equity managers. David had courted them for months, inviting them to this extravagant wedding production for one specific reason. He needed to showcase his supposed financial triumph to secure their lucrative capital investments. They were his next big marks. "Gentlemen," Sylvia said, her icy professional tone carrying effortlessly across the silent courtyard. "My name is Sylvia Hayes. I am a retired forensic accountant and the primary silent investor in the pediatric clinic your host intended to steal today. I strongly suggest you review the materials I am about to hand you before you wire another dime to this man." She extended her arms, distributing the heavy dossier to the bewildered businessman. The thick packets were secured with dark binding combs and organized with bright-colored index tabs. The crisp sound of turning pages echoed through the venue as the investors tentatively opened the covers. David finally found his voice, his pitch rising into a frantic, shrill register. "Do not look at those," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at my mentor. "She is a disgruntled former teacher. Those documents are entirely fabricated. This is a coordinated smear campaign." Sylvia ignored his desperate outburst. She stood before the seated men, folding her hands neatly in front of her waist. "If you turn to the red tab," Sylvia instructed, her voice steady and rhythmic like a metronome, "you will find the official filings from Federal Bankruptcy Court." David Sterling filed for commercial insolvency 8 months ago. His downtown wealth management firm lost its operating license shortly thereafter. The impressive portfolio he presented to your investment board is a hollow digital rendering containing 0 tangible assets. The venture capitalist stared at the stark black text printed on the pages. Their seasoned eyes tracked the undeniable federal tracking numbers and certified court seals. The polite confusion on their faces began to curdle into deep plum-cold rage. These were men who prided themselves on their sharp financial instincts. Realizing they had been lured to a fake wedding to fund a con artist was a severe insult to their professional egos. David scrambled down the wooden steps of the altar, his pristine tuxedo looking suddenly wrinkled and cheap. He rushed toward the businessman, waving his hands in the air. "Listen to me," he pleaded, sweat forming thick beads along his hairline. "I can explain the restructuring. It was a temporary liquidity issue. You know how the markets fluctuate. I have the capital secured." Sylvia cut him off without raising her voice. She merely spoke with a factual, devastating precision. "He does not have the capital secured," Sylvia informed the men, directing their attention to the next section of the binder. "Please refer to the yellow tab. There you will find a copy of the forged quitclaim deed and the predatory asset transfer contract he attempted to force upon his bride this morning. He intended to use her thriving medical practice as collateral to secure your preliminary investments." One of the older investors, a man with silver hair and a sharp jawline, traced his finger along the printed page. He looked up from the dossier, his eyes locking onto David with unfiltered hostility. Sylvia delivered the final fatal blow. "And if you turn to the blue tab, you will see exactly where your potential investments were slated to go. I have traced the remaining operating funds from his hollow firm directly into an offshore limited liability company. That company is controlled exclusively by his mother, Brenda Sterling. Your millions were not going toward emerging market portfolios. They were earmarked to pay delinquent country club dues, luxury vehicle leases, and high-end retail debts to maintain her illusion of high society wealth." The courtyard descended into sudden chaotic noise. The carefully maintained decorum of the wedding guests shattered. The wealthy businessmen slammed the doors shut, their faces rigid with fury. One of them stood up, retrieving his cellular phone from his suit jacket, dialing his legal team without a word. The surrounding guests erupted into sharp, judgmental whispers, pointing at the groom shivering in the grass. David tried to shout over the rising clamor spinning in circles to address the crowd. He begged them to stay, claiming there was a massive misunderstanding. He sounded like a drowning man, demanding the ocean stop rising. The paper trail was pristine and irrefutable. I stood on the altar, holding the microphone, watching the Sterling Empire burn to the ground. My gaze shifted toward the front row. Brenda stood frozen near her overturned folding chair. The arrogant, triumphant matriarch, who had bullied me in the bridal suite, was gone. She stared at the furious investors and the whispering elite socialites she had spent decades cultivating. The wealthy friends she relied upon for status and validation were literally inching away from her, pulling their designer coats tight against their bodies, looking at her with profound revulsion. Brenda realized her kingdom was gone. She was no longer a respected high society figure. She was a documented fraud exposed in the bright morning sun before her entire community. The air seemed to grow thin around her. Her face turned a chalky pale white. She looked at her son sputtering in the aisle and then up at me standing strong and unbothered on the platform. The reality of her impending social and financial ruin crashed down upon her shoulders. Panicking and desperate to halt the relentless public execution, Brenda resorted to the only tactic she had left: a diversion. She reached up with a trembling hand gripping the collar of her immaculate silver pantsuit. She let out a loud, ragged, breathless gasp designed to cut through the noise of the crowd. Her knees buckled beneath her. She swayed dramatically for a brief second before plummeting downward, hitting the manicured grass of the venue floor. Brenda Sterling crumpled to the manicured lawn, clutching her chest with a theatrical gasp. The dull thud of her body impacting the soft earth sent a tangible shock wave through the front rows of the audience. The pristine silver fabric of her tailored suit absorbed green stains from the crushed grass as she writhed. Her hands flew to her collarbone, her fingers curling into tight, dramatic claws while she dragged ragged, performative breaths into her lungs. David immediately abandoned his frantic pleading with the furious venture capitalists. He spun around and dropped to his knees beside his mother, shouting for someone to find a doctor. His voice cracked. portraying the image of a terrified son watching his only parent suffer a fatal cardiac event. It was a desperate, calculated pivot designed to shift the narrative. If they could not win on the financial facts, they would weaponize medical sympathy. They wanted to transform me from a victorious whistleblower into a cruel monster attacking a dying woman. The guests who had been whispering in outrage just moments before suddenly froze. Human nature dictates a specific response to physical suffering. The anger in the courtyard morphed instantly into alarmed confusion. Several people stood up from their white folding chairs, craning their necks to see the fallen matriarch. One of my bridesmaids, a young woman wearing a flowing lavender gown, reacted on pure instinct. She sprinted toward the catering table at the edge of the seating area, grabbing a tall glass of iced lemon water. She rushed back, dropping to her knees next to David. She held the condensation-beaded glass toward Brenda, offering a soothing word, urging the older woman to take a small sip and catch her breath. Brenda did not accept the water. A dying woman might lack the coordination to drink, but she would not possess the swift, calculated reflexes to reject aid. Brenda raised her arm and swatted the glass away with a sharp, forceful strike. The heavy crystal shattered against the stone pathway lining the grass. Ice cubes scattered across the lawn, gleaming like diamonds under the bright Illinois sun. The lemon slice landed near David's polished leather shoe. Brenda batted the drink away because sipping water would interrupt her loud, ragged gasping. It would break her character. She needed the crowd to hear her suffering, not watch her hydrate. The officiant, standing a few feet away on the wooden platform, panicked. He patted the pockets of his dark ceremonial robes, his fingers trembling as he withdrew his smartphone. He tapped the glass screen, hastily dialing emergency services, preparing to summon an ambulance to the venue. I stood above the chaos, holding the black wireless microphone in my right hand. I did not drop to my knees. I did not rush to offer comfort. I simply watched the charade unfold with cold clinical detachment. Brenda and David had forgotten a very crucial detail about my professional background. Earning a master's degree in speech-language pathology requires far more than teaching toddlers how to articulate their vowels. It requires hundreds of clinical practicum hours in hospital acute care wards. It demands a rigorous understanding of human anatomy, neurophysiology, and airway protection. I spent years studying dysphasia and respiratory coordination. I possessed mandatory advanced emergency medical certifications. I knew exactly what acute physical distress looked like in the human body. I took a deliberate step down from the elevated wooden altar, closing the distance until I stood looming over the trio on the grass. I analyzed Brenda from head to toe. A person experiencing a genuine myocardial infection typically exhibits profound physiological changes. Brenda displayed none of them. Her lips remained perfectly pink, lacking any bluish tint of cyanosis that would indicate oxygen deprivation, despite the loud staccato gasps she produced for the audience. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythmic pattern. I looked closely at her forehead under the warming morning sun. Her skin was perfectly dry, covered in a flawless layer of matte setting powder, displaying zero signs of diaphoresis. A heart attack triggers a severe sympathetic nervous system response, forcing the body into a cold sweat. Brenda was not dying. She was acting. I lifted the microphone to my lips. The electronic feedback hummed faintly over the outdoor speakers, cutting through the frantic shouts of the groom and the worried murmurs of the guests. "Put your phone away," I instructed the officiant, my voice echoing across the courtyard with sterile medical authority. "Do not waste the time of the local dispatchers." The officiant paused, his thumb hovering over the call button, his eyes darting toward me in profound confusion. David snapped his head upward, his face twisting in a mask of fierce indignation. "Are you insane, Ellen?" he yelled, spit flying from his lips. My mother is having a heart attack. Get away from her. I ignored him entirely. I turned my gaze out toward the remaining crowd, projecting my diagnosis to every single person sitting in the white folding chairs. I am clinically trained, I announced, my tone flat and unwavering. Her respirations are steady and controlled. Her skin tone indicates optimal oxygen perfusion. Her capillary refill is normal and she is displaying zero signs of diaphoresis. She is not experiencing a cardiac event. She is faking it to avoid the consequences of her own fraud. I lowered my gaze, staring directly into Brenda's dark, furious eyes. The older woman glared back at me, her ragged breathing faltering for a fraction of a second as she realized her medical theater had been expertly dismantled. Someone call her an Uber, I told the crowd, my voice ringing with finality. Not an ambulance. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The fragile sympathy that had briefly gripped the venue shattered into a million jagged pieces. The guests stared at the woman writhing on the grass, the realization dawning on them that they had just witnessed a pathetic, manipulative performance. Pity curdled into pure unadulterated disgust. The exodus began. The scraping of wooden chair legs against the stone pathway signaled the end of the sterling social reign. The wealthy venture capitalists had already vanished, carrying Sylvia's forensic dossiers out to their luxury vehicles. Now the high society elite Brenda had spent decades cultivating turned their backs on her. Women in expensive silk dresses grabbed their clutches, shaking their heads in revulsion as they marched toward the parking valet. The string quartet quietly packed their cellos and violins into velvet-lined cases, slipping out through the side gates. The lavish floral arrangements and the imported champagne flutes sat abandoned, a monument to a ruined heist. The venue emptied, leaving only the rustling wind and the harsh reality of their failure. I handed the wireless microphone back to the stunned officiant. He accepted it silently, stepping down from the platform and walking away, leaving me alone with the architects of my misery. David remained kneeling in the crushed grass. The polished, confident groom was reduced to a pathetic, shivering shell. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and hollow. The fake PC Philippe watch caught the sunlight on his wrist, a gleaming reminder of his empty life. He had nothing left to say. His charm was useless. His lies were documented. His mother lay beside him, her theatrical gasping replaced by a sting. Humiliated silence. I looked down at the man who had tried to steal my future. I hope the $150,000 was worth the show. David, I said, keeping my voice low and conversational, delivering the final fatal blow. Because I froze your access to those accounts at 3 o'clock this morning. You are broke and now everyone knows it. I did not wait for his response. I turned my back on the smoldering wreckage of their empire. I began the long walk back up the white carpeted aisle, heading toward the exit. The cheap cotton fabric of my $150 sundress brushed against my knees, feeling lighter and more beautiful than any custom silk gown ever could. The crisp Illinois air filled my lungs, tasting like freedom. I walked out of the courtyard, leaving the starings in the ashes of their own making. The transition from the chaotic wedding venue back to the quiet sanctuary of my suburban home felt surreal. By 9 o'clock that evening, the adrenaline had finally begun to recede, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. My house was dark, save for the warm glow of a single reading lamp in the living room. I sat on my plush linen sofa, holding a ceramic mug of peppermint tea, letting the silence wrap around me like a protective blanket. I had spent the afternoon coordinating with Sylvia, ensuring the irrevocable trust documents were firmly filed. I had changed the locks on my front and back doors, engaging the services of a local locksmith who installed heavy-duty deadbolts. I felt secure, insulated from the fallout of the morning. I took a slow sip of the hot tea, closing my eyes, savoring the profound peace of a life reclaimed. The silence was violently shattered by the roar of a high-performance engine tearing down my quiet residential street. Twin beams of harsh white headlights swept across my living room walls, illuminating the dark corners of the house. The screech of tires burning against the asphalt pierced the night air, followed by the heavy, aggressive crunch of a vehicle slamming into my concrete driveway. The harsh screech of rubber tearing against asphalt shattered the quiet sanctuary of my living room. Twin beams of blinding white headlights swept across my interior walls, casting long, distorted shadows against the paint. A heavy engine roared, then abruptly cut off. A car door slammed with enough force to rattle the window panes. I did not jump from my plush linen sofa. I did not drop my ceramic mug of peppermint tea. I sat perfectly still, feeling the warm porcelain against my palms, listening to the rapid, heavy footsteps charging up my concrete walkway. David pounded his fists against my heavy oak front door. The wood shuddered under the impact. The sound echoed through the quiet house. A frantic, desperate rhythm of a man whose entire universe had just collapsed. He twisted the brass handle, rattling the mechanism furiously. The newly installed commercial-grade deadbolts held firm, refusing to yield a single fraction of an inch. "Ellen opened this door right now," he shouted, his voice muffled, but entirely recognizable through the thick barrier. The smooth, charismatic tone of the wealthy financial manager was gone. The soothing pitch he used to charm pediatric therapists and manipulate wealthy venture capitalists had evaporated. His voice was raw, breathless, and cracking with sheer terror. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The mint tasted sharp and grounding. "We need to fix this," David yelled, striking the door again. "You cannot just walk away and freeze those accounts. You have no idea what you have done. The investors are threatening to file lawsuits. My mother is hyperventilating in a rented sedan. You owe us, Ellen." I lowered my mug, resting it on the wooden coffee table. I stared at the solid oak door, shaking my head in quiet amazement. Even now, stripped of his fake luxury watches and his fraudulent portfolios, he clung to his profound entitlement. He truly believed I owed him my livelihood. He believed that inserting himself into my life gave him permanent ownership of my labor. "You are nothing without the sterling family name," he screamed, his frustration boiling over into unfiltered cruelty. "You are just a mediocre suburban therapist. We were elevating you. We were bringing you into high society. And you ruined it over a simple business transfer. Unfreeze the commercial lines of credit right now. We can reverse the damage. I can still save the firm." He was bargaining with a ghost. He was demanding access to an empty shell company that no longer held a single dollar of tangible currency. I remained seated on my sofa, feeling a profound sense of detachment. I did not feel the urge to scream back. I felt no desire to defend my clinical credentials or argue about my worth. Engaging with a parasite only invites it to bite deeper. Silence was my most impenetrable armor. A loud, sharp crash erupted from the front porch, breaking the steady rhythm of his pounding fists. David let out a guttural yell, launching his heavy leather dress shoe into the large decorative planters flanking my entryway. I flinched slightly at the sound of shattering clay. Those were thick glazed terracotta pots holding tall, elegant ferns. I purchased those specific planters 5 years ago on the exact day I signed the commercial lease for my first clinic location. They represented my initial terrifying step into independent business ownership. Another violent crash echoed through the walls as he kicked the second planter. Wet potting soil spilled across the wooden deck boards. Ceramic shards clattered against the porch railings. He was destroying the beautiful things I nurtured simply because he could no longer destroy me. It was a pathetic display of a cornered predator lashing out at the scenery. A normal person sitting in a house under siege would reach for their cellular phone. A terrified homeowner would dial emergency dispatchers, pleading for local patrol officers to intervene. I glanced at my mobile device resting on the armrest. The screen remained entirely dark. I did not touch it. If I summoned the local police, they would treat this incident as a routine domestic disturbance. Uniformed officers would arrive, write a standard trespassing citation, ask David to step off the property, and advise us to settle our financial disputes in civil court. They would view an angry former groom kicking flower pots as a matter of bruised feelings rather than uncovering the sophisticated corporate theft driving his rage. I required a different caliber of justice. Sylvia Hayes had assured me that her morning activities would yield a specific devastating result. When a retired forensic auditor submits an expedited suspicious activity report directly to senior contacts at the Federal Treasury Department, the government does not dispatch local beat cops. They deploy specialists who understand the intricate mechanics of offshore shell companies and forged quick claim deeds. The atmosphere outside my front window shifted abruptly. The frantic sound of David kicking the shattered terracotta stopped. He was panting heavily, his breath rasping through the quiet night air. Then a new distinct light washed over my living room walls. It was not the harsh white glare of headlights. It was a rapid, silent strobing pattern of crimson and sapphire blue. The flashing colors swept rhythmically across the ceiling, filtering through the narrow gaps in the window blinds. There were no blaring sirens to announce their arrival. These vehicles operated with stealth, preferring the element of surprise over a noisy entrance. I stood up from the sofa, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. I walked slowly toward the front window, stopping just beside the heavy drapes. I used my index finger to part the horizontal blinds, opening a tiny sliver of visibility to observe the street. 3 dark, unmarked sport utility vehicles formed a tight blockade across my driveway and the immediate curb. The massive vehicle sat idling, their tinted windows impenetrable, their low-profile light bars cutting through the suburban darkness. The heavy reinforced doors of the lead vehicle swung open simultaneously. 4 figures stepped out onto the damp grass, moving with a coordinated, fluid precision that commanded instant respect. They wore dark tactical windbreakers. The stark yellow letters spelling out the Federal Bureau of Investigation stretched boldly across their broad shoulders. They did not shout warnings. They did not draw their service weapons. Their sheer overwhelming presence was enough to neutralize any chaotic energy in the vicinity. David stood on my wooden porch, his chest heaving, surrounded by the broken shards of my terracotta planters. He wiped a layer of nervous sweat from his forehead. Turning around to face the street, he froze. The anger instantly drained from his posture, leaving him entirely paralyzed. His arms dropped limply to his sides. He stared at the approaching agents like a man watching an avalanche descend upon his position. The lead agent, a tall, imposing man with close-cropped hair and a firm, unyielding jawline, walked directly up the concrete pathway. His boots crunched over the spilled potting soil. He stopped at the bottom of the wooden steps, looking up at the ruined groom. David Sterling, the agent, spoke, his voice carrying a calm, lethal authority that carried easily through the glass pane of my window. David swallowed hard, nodding once. His vocal cords seemed paralyzed. The agent reached into the interior pocket of his tactical windbreaker. He withdrew a leather credential wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gleaming gold badge under the amber glow of my porch light. He did not ask questions about the broken flower pots. He did not inquire about the cancelled wedding. "My name is Special Agent Miller," the man stated, holding the badge steady. "I am executing a federal search and seizure warrant regarding your commercial entities. I also hold a sworn warrant for your immediate arrest concerning multiple counts of interstate wire fraud and the attempted unauthorized transfer of commercial medical assets." David took a shaky step backward, his dress shoes sliding slightly on the wet dirt covering the porch boards. He raised his hands, palms facing outward in a weak gesture of surrender. "There is a massive misunderstanding," David stammered, his voice thin and hollow. "You need to speak with my mother. She handles the trust structures. I am just a consultant." "We will certainly be speaking with Brenda Sterling very soon," the agent replied, his tone devoid of any amusement. He reached toward the back of his tactical belt, retrieving a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The metal links clinked sharply in the quiet night. "But right now," the agent continued, stepping up onto the wooden porch, closing the final distance between them. "I need you to turn around, face the door, and put your hands behind your back." The heavy steel handcuffs clicked into place around David's wrists with a sharp, distinct metallic snap that carried easily through the cool night air. He offered no physical resistance. His shoulders slumped forward, his chin dropping toward his chest in an ultimate posture of defeat. The federal agent guided him down the wooden porch steps, maneuvering him carefully around the spilled potting soil and the shattered terracotta fragments of my ruined planters. Two other agents had already turned their attention toward David's luxury sedan parked haphazardly at the end of my driveway. They did not wait for his permission. One agent produced a physical copy of a signed federal search warrant, pressing it briefly against the driver's side window before pulling the door handle. I watched through the narrow sliver of my window blinds as the agents systematically dismantled his vehicle. The interior dome light illuminated their meticulous search. They popped the trunk, pulling out a sleek leather briefcase. The lead agent unclasped the brass buckles, sorting through the contents under the rhythmic, sweeping glow of the red and blue emergency lights. Even from my vantage point, inside the living room, I could see the sheer volume of illicit materials they uncovered. The agent pulled out stacks of banking hardware tokens, those small digital authenticators used to authorize high-level corporate wire transfers. He unearthed thick bound ledgers, multiple cellular phones, and a manila envelope stuffed with what appeared to be forged property deeds and notarized contracts. David had driven to my house to demand access to my clinic accounts while transporting a mobile, fraudulent enterprise in his passenger seat. His arrogance had blinded him to basic criminal operational security. The lead agent placed the evidence into clear plastic catalog bags. David stood by the rear bumper of the unmarked sport utility vehicle, watching his entire fabricated reality get itemized and tagged for a federal evidence locker. The agents guided him into the back seat, shutting the heavy reinforced door. The convoy of dark vehicles shifted into gear, pulling away from my curb, fading silently into the suburban Illinois night, leaving my street quiet and empty once more. I released the window blind, letting the heavy fabric fall back into place, shutting out the outside world. I turned around and leaned my back against the cool painted wall of my living room. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, slow breath. The scent of peppermint tea and damp earth from the broken planters drifted through the room. I felt a profound, unfamiliar lightness expanding inside my chest. For the past 5 years, I had constructed my entire identity around being agreeable. I was the dedicated pediatric therapist who worked late hours to accommodate frantic parents. I was the generous friend who paid for dinner. I was the supportive fiancé who smiled and nodded when her partner dismissed her questions about their shared financial future. I had spent my life studying the emotional needs of everyone around me, meticulously shrinking my own boundaries to ensure I fit perfectly into their designated spaces. I thought marrying into the Sterling family would finally provide the stable, loving environment I lacked since losing my own father. I wanted their approval so deeply that I willingly ignored the subtle condescension, the frequent boundary violations, and the constant demand for my silent compliance. I believed that if I was simply good enough, quiet enough, and accommodating enough, I would earn my place in their high society hierarchy. Watching David get loaded into a federal vehicle shattered that fragile, toxic illusion forever. The betrayal I suffered over the last 24 hours did not break me. It liberated me. The woman who wept on the hotel bathroom floor over a ruined silk dress was gone. Brenda Sterling had burned that version of me to ash inside the gas fireplace. She intended to destroy my spirit. But she merely burned away the timid, pleasing shell, leaving behind a hardened, unbreakable core. I no longer needed their validation. I no longer required a seat at a table funded by deception. I was the sole architect of my own survival. The following morning marked the beginning of a relentless, meticulous legal restructuring. Sylvia Hayes arrived at my house before 9 bearing hot coffee and a thick leather portfolio. She transitioned seamlessly from my former business professor into a fierce tactical mentor guiding me through the complex labyrinth of corporate asset protection. We drove to a soaring glass skyscraper in downtown Chicago, taking the elevator to the secure floor of a prestigious corporate law firm. We sat in a sprawling mahogany conference room overlooking the city skyline. Sylvia coordinated directly with a team of senior trust attorneys, finalizing the emergency protocols we had initiated the night before the cancelled wedding. I signed a series of permanent declarations solidifying the irrevocable trust. The attorneys filed the corresponding paperwork with the state of Illinois and the federal revenue agencies. Every tangible asset connected to my pediatric practice was absorbed into the protective legal fortress. The commercial lease for my suburban office building, the specialized therapy equipment, the business lines of credit, and my future operational revenue were securely locked away. I surrendered direct personal ownership, retaining only my status as the managing director and designated beneficiary. The lawyers confirmed that even if David attempted to produce the fraudulent asset transfer contract I signed under duress, it would be legally deemed a worthless piece of paper. He possessed a forged claim to a company that technically ceased to exist in the private sector. My life work was officially untouchable, while my legal defenses were reinforced with steel. The Sterling empire crumbled like dry sand. Over the next 2 weeks, the federal prosecutors moved with ruthless efficiency. David faced a formal arraignment in a downtown federal courthouse. The indictments were unsealed, listing dozens of felony charges encompassing interstate wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. The presiding judge, evaluating the massive scale of the deception and the sheer number of victims, deemed him a severe flight risk. The court seized his passport, restricting his travel to the immediate judicial district. The Treasury Department expanded their investigation, tracing the fraudulent offshore routing numbers Sylvia had flagged in her initial report. Federal regulators initiated a sweeping asset freeze. Every bank account, investment portfolio, and safety deposit box associated with David and his mother was locked pending a comprehensive forensic audit. They could not access a single dollar. The legal nightmare was devastating. But the social execution was far more brutal. High society operates on a rigid currency of perceived wealth and pristine reputation. The moment the federal indictments became public knowledge, Brenda Sterling experienced a total catastrophic exile from the world she were ripped. The elite country club, where she spent her afternoons drinking imported wine and judging her peers, swiftly revoked her membership, citing a morals clause in their bylaws. The charitable boards she chaired removed her name from their letterheads overnight. The wealthy wives who previously attended her lavish luncheons immediately blocked her phone number, pretending they had barely known her. The women Brenda had spent decades trying to impress recognized the federal taint clinging to her name and severed all ties to protect their own social standing. She was treated like a pariah, left entirely alone in a sprawling rented mansion she could no longer afford to heat. Mother and son were trapped in a labyrinth of their own design, facing impending prison sentences and crushing debt. I watched their downfall from a safe distance, focusing my energy on treating my patients and expanding my clinic programs. The storm was raging outside, but my house remained warm and secure. I had relinquished my role in their drama, handing their fate over to the judicial system. Exactly 3 weeks after the day I walked away from the altar, I was sitting in my private office at the clinic drafting progress reports for my pediatric clients. My personal cell phone buzzed against the wooden desk. The screen illuminated, displaying an unknown caller identification. I did not answer. I allowed the device to vibrate until the call transferred to the automated answering system. A minute later, a small notification icon appeared indicating a new voicemail message. I set my pen down, tapping the screen to play the audio file over the speaker. The sound of ragged, wet weeping filled my quiet office. It was a pathetic, broken noise followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Ellen," a voice croaked, the pitch trembling and thick with desperation. "Ellen, please pick up the phone." It was Brenda Sterling, the arrogant commanding matriarch who had tapped a gold pen against a glass table demanding my surrender, was gone. She sounded anxious, terrified, and entirely defeated. "I know you are listening," Brenda sobbed, her voice cracking under the weight of her impending ruin. "You have to call me back. The lawyers are taking everything. The bank is foreclosing on the house tomorrow morning. David is facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Ellen, 20 years. Please. You won. You proved your point." She paused, taking another ragged breath, the sound of her crying echoing through the digital recording. "I need to see you. Ellen," Brenda begged, her tone shifting into a frantic, pleading whisper. "Just you and me. No lawyers. No police. I can explain everything. We can fix this. Please meet with me. I want to make a deal." The ragged desperation in Brenda Sterling's voice echoed through the quiet confines of my clinic office long after the voicemail ended. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, letting the silence return to the room. 3 weeks ago, this kind of emotional manipulation would have sent my pulse racing. I would have felt a familiar heavy guilt settling in my stomach, questioning if I had reacted too harshly. I would have worried about David's future and searched for a way to mitigate the damage. I felt none of those things today. The audio recording did not inspire guilt. It merely confirmed the depth of her narcissistic delusion. Brenda truly believed she could negotiate her way out of a federal indictment with the same bullying tactics she used to orchestrate a fraudulent wedding. I did not delete the message. I forwarded the digital audio file directly to Sylvia Hayes and the senior partners at my corporate law firm, adding a brief note to the attachment. "She wants to meet." Sylvia replied 3 minutes later. "We dictate the battlefield." I agreed to Brenda's request for a secret meeting, but I refused to grant her the intimacy she desired. I would not meet her at a quiet coffee shop in the suburbs or the secluded corner of a public park. I required a setting that offered absolute security and projected undeniable authority. 2 days later, at precisely 10 in the morning, I sat at the head of a sprawling mahogany table inside the glass-walled conference room of my downtown Chicago legal counsel. The room hovered 40 stories above the city streets, offering a sweeping panoramic view of the bustling financial district. The environment was sterile, intimidating, and completely devoid of warmth. I wore a tailored navy blazer, my posture rigid, resting my hands flat against the polished wood. My lead attorney sat silently in a leather chair against the far wall, operating purely as an observer and a witness. The heavy glass door swung open. A junior paralegal escorted Brenda Sterling into the room. The physical deterioration of the former high society matriarch was shocking. The commanding, arrogant woman who had locked me inside a bridal suite and tapped a gold pen against a table demanding my surrender had vanished entirely. Brenda looked as though she had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Her signature immaculate silver hair was limp and flat, lacking its usual sculpted volume. She wore a simple black turtleneck and dark slacks devoid of the expensive tailored lines and subtle designer logos that once defined her wardrobe. The layers of foundation and setting powder could not conceal the dark, bruised circles resting beneath her bloodshot eyes. The aura of effortless wealth that surrounded her like a protective shield had been stripped away, leaving behind a tired, frightened shell. Brenda walked toward the mahogany table, pulling out a heavy leather chair opposite my position. She did not sit with her usual upright aristocratic grace. She sank into the seat, her shoulders slumping forward as if she were carrying a physical weight. She placed her purse on the table. It was the same expansive designer handbag she carried the night she knocked it off my hotel bathroom counter 3 weeks ago. That bag represented status and power. Today, resting on the polished wood next to my legal counsel, it looked pathetic. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she released the leather straps. Her knuckles were white, her manicured nails chipped and uneven. The bag was a hollow accessory, a worthless reminder of an empire she could no longer afford to maintain. "Ellen," Brenda began, her voice wavering, scratching against her throat. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know you must hate me." I did not offer a polite response. I did not nod or tell her it was okay. I simply stared at her, waiting for the performance to commence. Brenda swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably under my silent clinical gaze. She clasped her trembling hands together, resting them on the table. "I want to apologize for the night before the wedding," she continued, attempting to inject a tone of maternal sincerity into her cracking voice. "The dress. I feel terrible about the dress, Ellen. I was just so stressed about the wedding planning and the catering details. My nerves were completely frayed. I was not thinking clearly when I bumped into the fireplace screen. It was a horrible mistake. And I am so sorry it caused you such distress." The faux apology hung in the sterile air of the conference room. She was still trying to sell the narrative of a clumsy accident. Even facing federal ruin, she could not bring herself to admit the calculated malice behind her actions. She wanted to minimize the arson, framing it as an unfortunate byproduct of wedding planning stress rather than acknowledging it as a deliberate psychological attack. I remained cold, professional, and entirely immovable. "You did not ask me to this building to apologize for a ruined piece of silk. Brenda. Why are you here?" Brenda flinched at the sharp directness of my tone. She glanced nervously at the silent attorney sitting near the wall, then leaned forward, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "I came here to make this right, Ellen. I want to fix our family. We are not family." I corrected her smoothly, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. "We are opposing parties in an ongoing federal investigation. State your business." Her eyes filled with sudden, desperate tears. "David is looking at decades in a federal penitentiary, Ellen. They are charging him with multiple counts of interstate wire fraud. The prosecutors are trying to build a racketeering case against him based on the financial transfers from his previous engagements. He will not survive a maximum security prison. You know David. He is soft. He is a good boy who just got confused about his accounting practices." I watched a single tear escape her eye, tracing a path through her makeup. She was begging me to save the man who had actively plotted to destroy my pediatric clinic. She was asking the victim to shield the predator. "I can return the funds," Brenda offered, her voice dropping lower, her trembling hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table. "The $150. 000. I have access to a secondary offshore reserve that the federal agents have not located yet. I can wire the entire amount directly into your personal checking account this afternoon. Clean, untraceable money. It will be like none of this ever happened. You can buy new equipment for your clinic. You can expand your practice." She paused, scanning my face for a reaction. Leaning closer, hoping to reel me into her corrupt negotiation. "All I need you to do," Brenda whispered. The desperation coloring her tone is contact the federal prosecutor overseeing David's indictment. Tell them you are refusing to cooperate. Tell them Sylvia Hayes acted independently and you wish to withdraw your name from the witness list. If the primary victim refuses to testify, their case against my son weakens significantly. We can bury this. Ellen. We can all walk away. She was offering me a bribe using hidden stolen capital to buy my silence and subvert a federal criminal proceeding. She believed everyone possessed a price. She assumed my moral compass was as flexible and compromised as her own. I sat back in my leather chair studying the broken woman sitting across from me. I felt a profound sense of clarity wash over my mind. I did not feel anger. I felt an absolute unshakable certainty in my own worth. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, locking my gaze onto her bloodshot eyes. Setting boundaries is not revenge. Brenda, I stated, my voice resonating with cold factual authority. It is simply the natural consequence of your own actions. Brenda blinked, her mouth opening slightly, struggling to comprehend the rejection. You and David spent a year systematically lying to me. I continued laying out the reality of her situation. You targeted my empathy. You viewed my kindness as a weakness to be exploited. You set my property on fire to break my spirit and tried to force me into signing a fraudulent contract that would have chained me to your massive debts. You tried to steal a medical practice dedicated to helping disabled children simply to pay for your country club memberships. Ellen. Please. Brenda whimpered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. You are a forgiving person. You heal people for a living. Do not do this to my boy. I heal people who want to put in the work to get better. I corrected her, my tone hardening into steel. I do not heal parasites. I pushed my chair back from the table, standing up to my full height, smoothing the front of my navy blazer. I looked down at the weeping matriarch. Keep your hidden money, Brenda. I told her, picking up my briefcase. I do not need it. My clinic is fully funded and legally protected inside an irrevocable trust. You can never touch. Furthermore, I am not withdrawing my name from any witness list. I have already provided the Federal Bureau of Investigation with the digital photographs of your handwritten hotel stationery, your forged notary contacts, and every scrap of data Sylvia Hayes uncovered during our midnight audit. Brenda let out a loud, ragged sob, burying her face in her trembling hands. The sound was pathetic, echoing off the glass walls of the conference room. They already have the receipts. Brenda, I said, walking toward the heavy glass door. You cannot negotiate your way out of a burning building when you are the one holding the match. I did not wait for her to formulate another plea. I opened the door and walked out of the conference room, leaving Brenda Sterling weeping alone at the massive mahogany table, surrounded by the wreckage of her own arrogance. The months that followed my final meeting with Brenda were a period of intense focus and rebuilding. I poured my energy into my pediatric clinic, expanding our services and hiring 2 additional speech therapists to handle the growing waitlist. I surrounded myself with a chosen family of supportive, genuine friends, relying heavily on Sylvia's continued mentorship. The Sterling family faded into the background of my life, reduced to occasional updates from my legal counsel regarding the ongoing federal proceedings. I moved forward, refusing to let the trauma define my future. The transition from late autumn into a brutal Chicago winter brought a sense of quiet routine. I spent my evenings updating patient files and reading clinical journals, enjoying the peaceful solitude of my secure home. Late one Tuesday evening, nearly 8 months after the cancelled wedding, I was sitting in my living room reviewing a complex therapy plan for a new nonverbal patient. The house was silent. the baseboard heaters humming softly against the freezing temperatures outside. My cell phone chimed sharply on the coffee table, breaking my concentration. The screen illuminated, displaying a text message notification from Sylvia Hayes. I picked up the device, swiping the screen to open the message. Sylvia rarely texted, preferring direct phone calls or encrypted emails for important communications. A late-night message indicated something significant had occurred. I read the short, stark sentence she had typed. Turn on the local news channel immediately. You will not believe what she did. I grabbed the television remote, pressing the power button with a trembling thumb. The screen illuminated my dark living room, broadcasting the late-night local news segment Sylvia had flagged. The anchor sat behind a polished wooden desk reading from a teleprompter while a graphic of a federal courthouse hovered over his left shoulder. He detailed the shocking conclusion to the high-profile financial fraud trial that had captivated the city. The courtroom sketches displayed on the screen depicted a scene of ultimate family betrayal. Brenda Sterling stood at the witness stand pointing a manicured finger at her own son. She had struck a severe plea deal with federal prosecutors to avoid serving a lengthy prison sentence in a minimum security facility. The matriarch turned state's evidence. She handed the government every hidden ledger, every encrypted password, and every offshore routing number they required to secure a flawless conviction. She testified under oath that David was the sole architect of the entire criminal enterprise, painting herself as a naive, trusting widow who knew nothing about the forged documents. There is zero honor among thieves. David received a 72-month sentence in a federal penitentiary. The sketch artist captured the exact moment David realized his mother had sold his life to purchase her own freedom. His face was a mask of hollow devastation. His own flesh and blood locked his cell door. 1 year has passed since that broadcast, and 12 months have elapsed since I walked away from the altar in a cheap cotton sundress. The justice system dealt with David, but fate orchestrated a far more poetic punishment for his mother. Brenda surrendered the stolen funds and avoided a jail cell. But she could not escape the crushing weight of her financial reality. Without her son running fraudulent schemes to subsidize her lavish country club existence, her entire social facade imploded. The banks foreclosed on her sprawling suburban estate, seizing her luxury vehicles and auctioning her antique furniture to satisfy outstanding creditors. Her wealthy friends vanished, treating her name like a contagious disease. Today, Brenda works 40 hours a week as a front desk receptionist at a discount tax preparation franchise located inside a fading grey strip mall. The woman who once wore bespoke silk pantsuits and drank imported vintage wine now wears a stiff, scratchy polyester uniform blouse under flickering fluorescent lights. She spends her days answering ringing telephones, scheduling appointments, and organizing basic income forms for the exact demographic of middle-class workers she spent her entire life mocking and viewing as inferior. She sits behind a cheap particle board desk fetching lukewarm coffee for tired retail managers and local plumbers, enduring the profound humiliation of an ordinary, honest existence she always thought she was too important to experience. She is entirely destitute, trapped in a minimum wage purgatory of her own making. While the Sterling family imploded, my own world expanded in ways I never deemed possible. My pediatric speech therapy practice outgrew its original modest footprint. The irrevocable trust Sylvia helped me establish protected my core assets, allowing me to secure 2 additional commercial leases with incredible terms. We now operate 3 distinct clinic locations across the greater Chicago area, serving hundreds of children who need help finding their voices. The sterile quiet of my old life has been replaced by the joyful, chaotic noise of progress. The waiting rooms feature bright primary colors, comfortable seating, and the constant hum of hopeful parents. I hired a dozen new dedicated therapists, expanding our specialized programs to include sensory integration playrooms and advanced developmental workshops. More importantly, I built a genuine support system that nourishes my soul. My chosen family does not demand constant sacrifices or require me to shrink my personal boundaries to keep the peace. Sylvia Hayes remains my fiercest advocate and closest confidant, stopping by the flagship office every Friday morning with fresh pastries and unyielding encouragement. She showed me what true loyalty looks like. Not through empty promises, but through proactive, protective actions. I no longer bend backward to accommodate parasites. I found myself outside the main entrance of my flagship clinic on a crisp Tuesday afternoon, embracing the profound peace of my new reality. The bright spring sun warmed the back of my neck as I knelt on a padded foam mat near the front entrance. I dug a metal tell into the rich, dark soil, preparing a long rectangular garden bed flanking the concrete walkway. I carefully removed small lavender plants from their plastic nursery pots, loosening the tangled root systems before placing them gently into the earth. The pungent, calming scent of the purple herbs filled the air, mingling with the smell of damp soil and fresh mulch. Planting this garden felt like a physical declaration of my own stability. The deep undisturbed roots symbolized my hard-won peace and my refusal to be uprooted ever again. I patted the dirt firmly around the base of the final plant, brushing the soil from my palms. I was thriving. I was not succeeding out of spite or a lingering desire for retaliation against the people who tried to ruin me. I was flourishing simply because I had severed the dead weight pulling me underwater. The dirt resting under my fingernails felt like a brilliant badge of honor. The glass front door of the clinic clicked open, breaking my quiet reverie. My clinical assistant stepped out onto the sunlit concrete sidewalk, holding a stack of afternoon mail sorted into neat, categorized piles. She hesitated, shifting her weight nervously, looking down at the top envelope with a deeply furrowed brow. She extended her arm, handing the correspondence down to me without saying a word. The return address in the upper left corner was entirely blank. The envelope itself was made of cheap, thin paper bearing no professional letterhead or official stamps. But the blue ink cursive handwriting stretching across the center was an unmistakable looping scroll I recognized instantly. The letters formed my name with the same sharp curves I saw on a piece of hotel stationery 1 year ago. The cheap white envelope felt foreign, resting against the rough fabric of my gardening gloves. I stared at the looping blue cursive spelling out my name across the center of the paper. The handwriting was erratic and hurried, lacking the fluid, confident elegance it possessed a year ago on a piece of hotel stationery. There was no return address listed in the upper corner, but I did not need one to identify the sender. The sharp, harsh angles of the letters gave her identity away instantly. I peeled the thin paper flap open. The cheap adhesive gave way with a weak tearing sound. I unfolded the 2 pages tucked inside. The stationery was not her usual heavy embossed card stock. It was standard printer paper crinkled at the edges and stained with a faint ring of coffee. I stood up from my planting mat, leaving my trowel in the dirt, and began to read the dense, frantic paragraphs Brenda Sterling had penned. She did not open the correspondence with an apology. She launched directly into a rambling, disjointed manifesto outlining her own profound victimhood. She wrote that I lacked the grace to understand high-stakes business negotiations. She claimed that freezing the clinic accounts was a hysterical, vindictive reaction to a minor legal misunderstanding. According to her twisted narrative, I was the sole architect of her destruction. She blamed me entirely for David sitting in a federal penitentiary. She dedicated an entire paragraph to detailing how much he suffered behind bars, conveniently omitting the stark reality that she was the star witness who testified against him to secure her own freedom. She detailed the severe indignity of her current employment, complaining bitterly about the harsh fluorescent lighting and the rude middle-class customers at the discount tax preparation office. She cursed Sylvia Hayes by name, calling my mentor a meddling, arrogant spinster who ruined a perfectly good family. The final paragraph was a demand for my forgiveness. Brenda stated that holding on to anger was a toxic trait. She insisted that I owed her a clear conscience because my pediatric clinics were thriving while she suffered in poverty. It was a masterpiece of narcissistic delusion. She demanded immediate absolution without ever acknowledging the arson, the forged documents, or the attempted theft. She wanted a full pardon for a crime she still refused to admit she committed. A year ago, receiving a letter like this would have triggered a severe physiological response. My heart would have raced, pushing panic through my veins. My stomach would have knotted into a tight, painful ball of anxiety. I would have carried those pages inside my office, pacing the floor, dissecting every single sentence. I would have questioned my own memory, wondering if perhaps I had acted too swiftly or judged them too harshly. I would have drafted a dozen different replies on my computer, trying to find a polite, diplomatic way to ease her suffering while protecting my own boundaries. The old version of me, the woman who shrank herself to keep the peace, would have felt responsible for her pain. I used to believe that setting a boundary meant I was failing to be compassionate. Today, reading those desperate, shifting accusations, I felt a distinct sound bubble up from the depths of my chest. It started as a soft breath and grew into a bright, genuine laugh. It was not a bitter sound. It was the pure, unburdened laughter of a woman who recognizes a trap and simply steps over it. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I felt nothing but profound relief that this woman held zero power over my reality. I did not finish reading the second page. I gripped the top edge of the printer paper, holding the rambling manifesto in both hands. I pulled my fists in opposite directions. The pages tore down the center with a crisp, satisfying rip. I aligned the torn halves and ripped them again, reducing her toxic demands to ragged, uneven quarters. I walked over to the tall blue recycling bin positioned near the glass entrance of my flagship clinic. I opened the heavy plastic lid and dropped the shredded pieces of her letter inside. I watched the white scraps flutter down among the discarded cardboard boxes and empty water bottles. That was exactly where her manipulation belonged. It was trash. I did not need to formulate a response or defend my choices. Silence is the most devastating answer you can give to a predator seeking your energy. I turned my back on the recycling bin, looking at the welcoming glass doors of the sanctuary I built. Through the windows, I could see my receptionists smiling and greeting arriving families. I could hear the faint muffled sound of children laughing in the sensory playroom. This was my real life. It was sturdy, beautiful, and entirely mine. If you are listening to my story right now, I want you to pause and reflect on your own life. I want you to examine the people who occupy your inner circle. Narcissists, manipulators, and financial predators do not wear warning labels. They arrive wearing tailored suits and offering charming smiles. They sit across from you at expensive dinners and tell you that you are an unstoppable team. They pretend to shoulder your burdens while quietly mapping out the combination to your vault. They prey on empathetic individuals because they know caretakers will always try to fix a broken dynamic instead of walking away from it. They bank on your desire to be the good person. Here is the most critical lesson I learned from the ashes of my wedding dress. When people show you who they are, believe them the very first time. Do not wait for the scent of melting silk to fill your lungs before you acknowledge the fire. Do not wait for them to burn your life to the ground before you find the receipts. If a partner dismisses your questions about shared finances and demands blind trust, that is a receipt. If a family member routinely belittles your accomplishments and demands your silent compliance, that is a receipt. If someone expects you to sacrifice your hard-earned stability to fund their reckless lifestyle, you do not need to wait for a forged contract to know you are being robbed. The red flags are always there, waiting for you to stop making excuses for the people holding them. You hold the power to define your own boundaries. Your empathy is a beautiful, rare gift. but it must be guarded by an impenetrable fortress of self-respect. Never allow anyone to convince you that protecting your assets, your peace of mind, or your future is an act of cruelty. Setting an ironclad boundary is not a declaration of war against another person. It is a declaration of your own survival. Do not fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy. Just because you spent years investing in a relationship does not mean you owe them your future. You are allowed to change the locks. You are allowed to run the midnight audits on the people demanding your trust. You are allowed to walk away from tables where love is served as a conditional transaction. Do not fold yourself into a smaller shape to fit inside a room where you are not respected. Look closely at the relationships surrounding you. Are they watering your roots or are they poisoning your soil? You possess the immense strength required to cut the dead weight loose. You have the right to build a life filled with genuine support, unvarnished truth, and indestructible peace. Do not accept the cheap, fragile illusions they try to sell you. Demand the sturdy, undeniable reality you deserve. I want to hear from you now. Have you ever faced a defining moment where you finally realized a toxic relationship was designed to drain you? How did you set your boundary and take your power back from the people who tried to diminish you? Share your experiences in the comments below because your story might be the exact spark someone else needs to finally lock their door and rebuild their life. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button and join our community. We share these stories to remind each other that standing up for ourselves is the bravest thing we can do. Thank you for listening to my truth and spending your time with me today. Remember this always as you navigate your own path. You are worthy of a love that protects you. You deserve to be chosen first. The waiting room of my pediatric speech therapy clinic is filled with primary colors, soft foam mats, and the quiet, steady hum of parental devotion. Every afternoon, I watch mothers and fathers sit on undersized wooden chairs, their knees pulled up to their chests, waiting patiently as their toddlers struggle to form simple syllables. I watch these parents celebrate tiny incremental victories. A harsh consonant finally pronounced correctly, a full sentence strung together without frustration. They are doing the hard, unglamorous work of raising human beings. They are instilling resilience, guiding their children through difficulty rather than simply removing the obstacle. Watching them often pulls my mind back to the ashes in a boutique hotel fireplace and to the woman who stood over them holding a silver lighter. When the federal indictments were handed down and the gavel finally fell on David and Brenda Sterling, the immediate sensation was relief. The threat to my livelihood was neutralized. But as the months passed and the adrenaline faded, that relief slowly morphed into a profound, lingering question. How does a family become a cartel? How does a mother look at her son and decide that the best way to love him is to teach him how to steal? The answer, I realized, lies in a fundamental corruption of family responsibility. Brenda believed she was a devoted mother. In her twisted narrative, she was protecting her child, ensuring his survival, and maintaining their legacy. But loyalty without accountability breeds monsters. In American culture, we place a heavy emphasis on the aesthetic of success. We idolize the self-made entrepreneur, the tailored suits, the luxury watches, and the corner offices. We tell our children to reach for the stars, to acquire wealth, and to claim their piece of the American dream. But somewhere along the line, in households like the Starings, the lesson fractures. The focus shifts entirely from how you build your life to what you can acquire. David was raised to believe that looking successful was the exact same thing as being successful. Brenda did not teach her son how to lay a foundation. She taught him how to locate houses that other people had built, pick the locks, and change the deeds. When we talk about traditional family structures and the values that sustain them, we often default to concepts like providing and protecting. But true protection is not shielding your child from the consequences of their own actions. If David broke a window as a young boy, I imagine Brenda did not make him sweep up the glass or apologize to the owner. I imagine she simply bought the building and fired the person who installed the window. By removing the consequence, she removed his opportunity to develop a conscience. Honesty and fairness are not innate traits. They are muscles. They must be exercised daily through guidance, correction, and emotional awareness. Emotional awareness means recognizing that the people around you are not supporting characters in your personal play. They are not stepping stones, safety nets, or marks to be exploited. They are entire universes possessing their own hopes, fears, and boundaries. Brenda stripped David of his emotional awareness long before he ever met me. She taught him that empathy was a vulnerability to be leveraged. When he held me in that hotel doorway, pretending to comfort me over the dress his mother had just burned, he felt no remorse. He only felt the ticking of his watch. He was a hollow vessel echoing the predatory values his mother had carefully poured into him. Raising a child requires a relentless commitment to truth. Even when the truth is uncomfortable. It means sitting your child down and explaining that failure is a necessary component of growth. It means teaching them that a simple cotton sundress bought with honest money holds infinitely more value than an expensive silk gown purchased with lies. If we fail to teach our children the inherent value of fairness, we send them out into the world armed with entitlement, a weapon that eventually destroys both the wielder and everyone they touch. I look at the parents in my clinic, the ones who work double shifts just to afford therapy for their children. They are teaching their kids that their voices matter, but also that they must put in the effort to be heard. They are demonstrating profound family responsibility. They are choosing the difficult, honorable path of actual parenting. The contrast is staggering. I used to wonder if Brenda felt any guilt sitting behind the reception desk at that discount tax office sorting the financial documents of the very people she once viewed as prey. I doubt she does. Guilt requires a moral compass, an instrument she smashed a long time ago to make room for her own ego. She will likely spend the rest of her days blaming the world for her son's incarceration, never realizing that she forged the bars to his cell the very first time she told him that the rules did not apply to him. If exploring these deep, sometimes uncomfortable truths about family dynamics, generational values, and the courage it takes to break toxic cycles resonates with you, I encourage you to follow the channel Sophia Told Stories. We navigate the intricate, often messy realities of human relationships, uncovering the lessons hiding beneath the surface of our most difficult trials. Subscribe and join our community as we share narratives that challenge us to look closer at the foundations we are laying in our own lives. As I lock the doors to my clinic each evening and walk out to my car, I often pause by the lavender garden I planted near the entrance. The roots have taken firm hold in the dark Illinois soil. The plants are thriving, weathering the heavy rain and the harsh winds, bending but never breaking. They remind me that what we cultivate matters. We are all planting seeds every single day, whether we realize it or not. With every boundary we set, every truth we uphold, and every consequence we enforce, we are shaping the future. We are deciding what kind of people we release into the world. Sometimes late at night when the house is quiet and the world slows to a halt, I wonder about the families who look perfect from the outside. I wonder about the smiles and the holiday photographs, the manicured lawns and the tailored suits. You never truly know what kind of foundation rests beneath the floorboards. You never know if they are building a sanctuary or if they are simply playing with matches, waiting for the wind to change.